L'chaim, good Yom Tov, good Yom Tov. So Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz, we all know, is the Yom HaGeula, the Yom HaNes of the Farbrengen Rebbe. And the Iker Geula, the main element of the miracle was not just the day itself, that we know Yud Beis Tammuz, the Farbrengen Rebbe was told unofficially that he won't have to be in prison or in the Golus. And then Yud Gimel, which was the Wednesday when he was officially allowed to get the Ishur, the permission, the official certificate that he could leave. But in which way did it express itself, the actual Nes and the actual miracle? There's one thing to have the Farbrengen Rebbe out of prison. There's another thing, is that what did it do? What did it accomplish? And what's clear is that after Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, although on some level it seems like things actually got a little worse, initially the thought was that now Farbrengen Rebbe could go back to business, so to speak, which he was doing before, which was basically what happened is that as soon as the communists came into power, they decided to shut down religion. So all the Rabbanim, who are the heads of the cities, of the communities, basically left. And the Farbrengen Rebbe took it upon his shoulders to basically keep Yiddishkeit alive. So he took the Bachrim from Yeshiva and he made them Rabbanim, he made them Shachtim, he made them Moelim, he sent them throughout. They were all Meiser Nefesh. So right after Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the assumption is that sort of maybe the government is relenting a little bit in its persecution. But that wasn't the case, because what they ended up doing is that they ended up having that whoever got involved with the Farbrengen Rebbe was arrested. But on the other hand, what it led to was the Farbrengen Rebbe's eventual leaving Russia, going to then Poland, and eventually coming to the United States of America. And that effect of the Farbrengen Rebbe coming to the United States of America really in many ways was a result of the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz event. Because we know the pressure that was put on the Russian government at the time, and those advocates, etc., eventually led to this eventual coming to America. And what the Farbrengen Rebbe started doing in Russia, in a moment of necessity, became the whole mission, which was to spread Yiddishkeit everywhere. The whole Katzvei table, the entire world should be spread with Yiddishkeit. And as we know, when the Farbrengen Rebbe came to America, the famous line the Farbrengen Rebbe said is, America's nicht anders. America's not going to be any different. America initially was inhabited by Yidden that were Reformed. The Reform came first to America, so most people didn't have much of a frugal life. And the Farbrengen Rebbe came and fought the American institution, the American way of life. And the Farbrengen Rebbe said that America's nicht anders. And from there, it sprung up. Then he sent shluchim here to Australia, etc. Throughout the whole world, the Farbrengen Rebbe started this process of refining the world, of taking all the elements of the world and making sure there's not a pina nedachas, there's not a single place that doesn't have the Neir Mitzvah Torah, that doesn't have the light of Torah and the Kiyam Mitzvahs within it. So in many ways, that was the event of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. It started a certain process, a process through which there was going to be nowheres that there's not elevation, taking, as we know, the Olam Maloshin Helam, taking the hidden concealment of the world. That the world sees itself as something which is, on one level, doesn't shine godliness, doesn't shine Elokus. On the same level, may even contradict and say that there is no Eibishter, there is no element of Elokus. So came the Farbrengen Rebbe and began that process. The Rebbe has an asicha on Chof Beis Shvat. The Rebbe there distinguishes between his avodah, the Farbrengen Rebbe's avodah, and the Rebbetzon's avodah. It's a very interesting sicha. And the Rebbe says that the Farbrengen Rebbe was working milamata l'mayla. The Farbrengen Rebbe's whole avodah was refining the tachten, to take the world and to be able to refine it, to be able to then enable it to receive the light that is going to come, the Gilui, the revelations, the Hamshacha of Atzmus, which the Rebbe basically says, which the Rebbe says about himself, that was his avodah. And he says that the Rebbetzon's avodah was to bring the two together. Ein kamer komer. So that really began in its earnest, in its fullest measure after Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. In many ways, that was the concept of, not just was, is the concept of getting the world ready as the Rebbe spoke, Zirkind Parshas Balak, where the Rebbe speaks about the whole idea of Yemois HaMashiach, the main thing of Yemois HaMashiach is Shleimus HaTorah VaMitzvah, having the world in its perfect state, and enabling the world to be able to fulfill Torah Mitzvahs in its most proper form. So in many ways, that began by Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, or after Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. As we know, that the Rebbe quoted many times the Pirush of the Arizal, the pasuk in Esther, Yamim ha'ela niskanim v'nasim, that every year the same effect that took place the first time comes again. And not only comes again, but as we know, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that every year there's an additional level of it. That means we're now 90-something years since the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz of 1927, Tafresh Pei Zayin. The amount of new Eidus, of new light that we're receiving now is way beyond it was even the first year. So in many ways, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz is on a much greater level now than it ever was. Not in many ways, in all the ways. In that, and now we're receiving an energy that's much, much greater. And I think, saying I think is a problem, but this year especially, the energy is on even a more intense level. We're just coming out from Gimel Tammuz, and this year is Shleishim Shana, it's 30 years of Gimel Tammuz. On the one hand, if we look throughout history, what's Gimel Tammuz historically? So Gimel Tammuz, we know, is the day Shemesh Begivin Daim, Yeshua held up the sun for the Yidden to be able to beat Amalek. The ultimate of Yedeyas Riboinei Mechavel Lima, by the generation we're living through today. Today we could see clearly the hand of Hashem, and yet people want to deny that. Today we have Amalek, at least in this element of Amalek. And Yeshua held up the sun, allowed for that light to shine. Those days, the way battles worked was when the sun set, they stopped fighting with each other. So he held the sun up so they could keep on fighting. The Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah how the time had to be made up later. Different story. Then later on in history, what do we have? Gimel Tammuz. Gimel Tammuz. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was officially was made aware that his original death sentence was revoked. It was really the Chodesh Tammuz. But then he knew he was going to have to travel on Shabbos. So it ended up really being officially Gimel Tammuz. So Gimel Tammuz became the day that Rebbe made a very big deal about Gimel Tammuz. That was the day that the Frierdiker Rebbe, the idea of Chas v'Shalom, that Frierdiker Rebbe being killed, which was what everybody thought was going to happen, was changed. As the Frierdiker Rebbe says, he saw that on the paper something was written and it was erased, crossed out. The Rebbe says he didn't want to say what was written there because he was still alive. He didn't want to say something negative about it. But that was what the Rebbe said. It was on that paper. So really, Gimel Tammuz, before Tavshin Nun Daled, Gimel Tammuz is the whole meaning of Chaim. It's the whole meaning of life. The whole idea of the Yidden surviving Amalek, Shemesh Begivin Daim, the reversal of a death sentence to become Indian of Chaim. And that's what Gimel Tammuz is. What do we relate to Gimel Tammuz? Seemingly the opposite in you. The idea of Gimel Tammuz seems to be the very opposite. The hell and the hester, the concealment and the darkness that came as a result of Gimel Tammuz. So now 30 years beyond, I remember Gimel Tammuz, and I'm sure all of you who remember Gimel Tammuz, was no doubt that was, the Rebbe Sichas and Tavshin and Aleph, Tavshin and Beis was so clear. It's like as if Mashiach was coming at that moment. There was no doubt that that's what's going to happen on that day. And so to speak, if we could use the word, the trauma that resulted afterwards is, I don't know if we've recovered maybe on some level. But at the same time, we know what the Rebbe said about 30 years plus, 30 years, the Shnas HaShloishim of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Histalkus of Yud Shvat, in the year Tavshin Mem, the Rebbe made the whole year into a big deal. Shnas HaShloishim. And the Rebbe spoke then about the tremendous amount of Chas v'Shalom to think that things are getting weaker and less. On the contrary, things are getting stronger and stronger. There's even more energy. Mazari b'chaim, afu b'chaim. There's more being accomplished. And the Rebbe there connected it to the mission in Avos, the mission in Pirkei Avos that says, Ben shloishim l'koyach. that when someone reaches the age of 30, 30 represents the idea of koyach, simply put, strength, physical strength. The Rebbe also brought the Tzemach Tzedek, the beard of the Tzemach Tzedek, that there's the idea of 10 oiris pnimium. You have kalim, right? So you have the 10 oiris pnimium. You have the light that is handled, that could be contained in a vessel. Then you have the 10 vessels, and then you have the light that is above the vessel, which all together, these Lamed Kalim, these 30 levels of energy together enable to be a certain level of creation, a certain level of being mamshich, to draw down levels of godliness. So that the Rebbe was masber that's really what 30 years represents, the tremendous amount of earth. That means it's not that there's more darkness. On the contrary, there's more light. There's greater light. So I was thinking that Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz has a tremendous connection to Gimel Tammuz besides the obvious connection, which is the beginning of when the Frierdiker Rebbe was when he was told that he wasn't going to, or at least found out that he wasn't going to be executed. But more about Gimel Tammuz Tavshin Nun Dalet, that the connection between Gimel Tammuz Tavshin Nun Dalet and Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Tavshin Pei Dalet. We find that Rashi tells us, in Parshas Bamidbar, Rashi tells us, the Pasuk says that when they counted the Leviim were counted at 30. At 30 years old is when they started doing their Avodah. Why at 30 years old? The Rambam learns, Pashut, that the music that they had to learn was a hard craft. Music is not a simple, music theory is not easy, to learn an instrument or to learn how to sing properly, whatever it was. It took time. The Gemara in Chulin says that they had 5 years of learning, and then at the age of 30, they're able to do the Avodah. There's a big machloikis, Rishainim, not going to get into it, about whether it actually is 30, whether it was only Bizman, the Midbar, even later, Rambam, whatever, makes no difference right now. But Rashi there says that Mikan, from here is the source of Enshleishim L'Koyach. That this whole idea that the Mishnah says in Avos, that where do we see this idea that at 30 years old you reach your full koyach? That's from the fact that the Leviim started their Avodah at 30. So the question is, why? What's the connection between the idea of the Avodas HaLeviim that specifically was related to the number 30, when they were 30 years old, that from there we take out this concept of Enshleishim L'Koyach? So we find something very interesting. The Gemara in Chulin over there, the Gemara over there says that there's a major distinction between Kohanim and Leviim. It says by Leviim ein mum psulim, ein mum paislim, that if they have a mum, it doesn't passel them from doing the avodah. That's also with a machlokes. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu had a thick voice, it was passel, whatever, Rashi, Ramban, whatever. However, Shana and Paislin, if they're above a certain age or below a certain age, they couldn't do the Avodah. So a Levi, by Leviim, their Avodah was very much contingent on age, on Shanim. Versus Kohanim, the Gemara says, is the opposite. First, the Gemara wants to say that maybe Kal V'chomer, but the Gemara leaves it that by Kohanim, a mum is what disqualifies them. However, age doesn't disqualify them. As soon as they reached the age of Shtei as soon as they reached the age of maturity, they were able to do the Avodah, although L'Poel the Kohanim didn't let them do the Avodah until they reached 20 for whatever. So what exactly is the difference between the Avodah of the Leviim and the Avodah of the Kohanim? Why is it that by the Kohanim they were able to start the Avodah right away, versus by the Leviim they had to wait till 30? In which way was their Avodah different? So we know that what was the Ikar Avodah of the Kohanim? The Ikar Avodah of the Kohanim was, the Gemara tells us in Zvachim and elsewhere, right, is Kabbalah Ve'elech, that they had to take the blood after the Shechita. The Shechita was able to be done, the slaughtering of the animal could be done by anybody, by a Zar, and then from Kabbalah Sadam, from receiving the blood into the container and bringing it to the Mizbeach, and then putting the animal parts of the animal on the Mizbeach, etc., was all have to be done by Kohanim. And in addition, and perhaps the most important factor, is that the Kehanim had to eat of the carbon, especially if it was a carbon Achdus, as the Gemara tells us in Psachim, that Kehanim, the Bailam is chaprim, that through the Kehanim eating, they were able to give kapara for the Yid. At Krekach, Taisus has to Shiloh there, that the Gemara in Zvachim seems to be mashma, that the Iker was the sprinkling of the blood, not the eating of the carbon. But he says that if the carbon was chazil achil, if they were able to eat the carbon and they didn't eat the carbon, it was a pgam. It didn't effectuate the kapara that was necessary. So by Kehanim we see their avodah primarily was with dealing with the actual hakrava, the actual bringing of the carbon on the mizbeach and then digesting it or ingesting it in order to and eating it. However, what was primarily the avodah of the Levim? So we know the Levim were involved in closing the gates, right? The famous the Gemara says that the people that closed the gates couldn't be, right? Then they did the shmira. But what was the ikar avodah l'chora? It's machlekes t'shem, but the ikar avodah was b'shira. They sang. The Kehanim didn't sing. Kehanim did do shmira around, as the Mishnah in Midas and in Tammuz tells us. But when it comes to what was their main avodah, the Chinuch says the ikar avodah of the Levim was b'shira, singing. Now, both elements, the shira, the singing, and the hakrava, were two components in bringing a carbon. Not only according to the shita of Rameir, the Gemara in Zirkind tells us, Rameir says that if you don't have shira, if you don't have the Levim singing at the time of the bringing the carbon, it's ma'akiv, the carbon is disqualified. But even with Das Rabbanan that hold that it's not disqualified, still they would hold that it's an essential part of the Avodas HaCarbon. Is the actual shira. So in what way, or what is the difference between the Avodas HaLevim and the Avodas HaKehanim, that the Levim was dafke b'shira, and therefore we say they need to be 30 years old, versus the Avodas HaKehanim was taking the blood, etc., eating the carbon that could start as soon as they're of age, of bar mitzvah, or whatever it was, shtei. So we know that the inyan of a carbon is brought down by the Rishonim, the Ramban, Ibn Bachai, the Rebbe quotes this, that they quoted many times, is the inyan of kidav ha'koiches v'achushim. The whole idea of a carbon means to bring yourself close. What does it mean to bring yourself close? That means there's a part of us that's disconnected. There's a part of us that's not refined. There's a part of us, as we know, the Maimer Basi Lagani beginning, the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about the whole avodas hakarbonis, is all about this refinement of the person, and the different types of animals, menat boker, menat tzoyin. The avodah of the carbon was a relationship-building process between us and the Eibishter. That was the idea, especially if it's a carbon Achdus, where there was some sort of disattachment in the relationship, something broke apart in the relationship, something was a miss in the relationship, a misalignment. You have to realign yourself through the carbon. So the idea of a carbon is where a person is bringing himself, refining himself, elevating himself in his relationship with the Eibishter. And in this, there's two different aspects. There's one aspect which is more of an inyan pnimi, something from within the person himself. The person on his own, he has a seichel, a person has his faculties of intellect, his emotional faculties. There's a certain process of birurim that a person has to go through. A person refines himself. He has to make sure, as again, my modern over there in Boston Lagani talk about the idea of refining the person's seichel amidus in order to bring himself close to the Eibishter. That's a very introspected avodah, an avodah that comes within the person, that's within the gdorim of the person, is within the person's boundaries, it's within the person himself, that the person is refining himself and bringing him close to the Eibishter. And that's primarily through a lot of iskafia, and if you reach his hapcha levels. But again, it's all a way of refining the person to reaching the person's sort of their max, which is primarily the avodas habirurim. However, there's another element of the carbon. The other element of the carbon is the idea of shira, of song. What's the idea of song? So we know that Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that the idea of shira, of song, is ratzi v'shuv, a deep yearning, a kalois hanefesh, an experience of where you're transcending yourself, where you're going beyond yourself, where you're not just refining yourself anymore. You're going somewhere beyond. You're being taken to a higher dimension, to a higher plane. When you went into the Beis Hamikdash, you're overwhelmed by the Kedusha. You're overwhelmed by the Gilui, that it didn't just make you refined. It elevated you. It took you to another higher level. And that's the idea of the Shira, of the singing that the Leviim had. So l'chora, you could say that that's the reason why the Leviim had the Psul B'Shanim. Why were the Leviim limited, or why did the Leviim have to reach the age of 30? Because their Avodah in many ways was much greater. You can't just start elevating and transcending. You have to reach the level of 30. The level of 30, the Inyan of Shloshim, is the Inyan of Koyach. You reach a state, a certain madrega, a certain ability that now you could not only refine yourself, but elevate yourself even more. The avoid of the Levim only could start when they reached the madrega of Shloshim. So the pshat of ben Shloshim lekoyach, which is learned out the avodah of Levim, is because only when you reach that level of Shloshim could you do the avodah that is required of the Levim. Masha'en came the Kayhanim is avodah, which is an avodah more within a person's own level. That avodah could start when you reach an age of maturity. As soon as you start realizing you exist, that you're a human being that has, intellectual and emotional mechanisms, you can start working on yourself and refining yourself. That starts right away at 13 years old. It's actually interesting. Chaim HaKadosh. Chaim says, the famous Zohar that says, the Rabbi brings that the neshama doesn't enter, the nefesh elokis doesn't enter the guf until 13 by a boy. The beginning may start by the bris, the Rebbe says Kodesh Yermelei, whatever. That means for 13 years, the only programming that a person has is the nefesh bahamis. Says the Rachayim, so l'chura, the Eibusha can never have a taina to us. We should never be able to be held accountable for whatever we do. Why? He says because there's a Mishnah Baba Kama. The Mishnah Baba Kama says, Dafnun, that they used to have the Sheirheit Stadlin. They used to take oxen, and they used to train the oxen for the amphitheaters, for the different Roman, the bullfights, whatever it was. The whole idea was to train them how to become goring animals. So the Mishnah says, if you have a Sheirheit Stadlin that gores, he's not chayiv. The person's not chayiv because he was trained to do so. Zakter Achayim, we're all trained this way. So what does Eibusha want from us? Al Kol Panim, when you reach the age of 13 is when you can start doing avodah, but it's not. That's when you become aware of yourself, and that's therefore this chayvus. That's when you begin chiyuv mitzvahs. So for a kayan's avodah, it starts at 13. Perhaps we could add something that we find something very interesting bisman hazeh. When it comes to the Levim, there's no mitzvah that's associated with the Levim bisman hazeh. Kohanim have, the Gemara tells us in Gittin, v'kidashtoi, right, that you have to give him rishon. He has a mitzvah of duchening. It's 3 mitzvahs asay. Levi doesn't have any mitzvah associated today. So b'pashtus, you would think, therefore, that because there's a limitation, so to speak, in the avodah that we could accomplish, so therefore the Levi doesn't have any mitzvah for his avodah of shira. It's not shaykh bisman hazeh. However, in Shulchan Aruch it's brought, the Beis Yosef quotes the Zohar that says that there's a minig that the Levim wash the hands of the Kehanim. Halacha says that a kohen, the Gemara in Seita says that a kohen that doesn't wash his hands before duchening is possible to do the kohuna, to do the duchening. So he had to wash his hands. So the Zohar says, and it's brought lahalacha, that the Levim should wash the hands. And the lashon is minig, and we know what the Rebbe says, that a minig is higher than halacha. And the Alter Rebbe gets over there. The Alter Rebbe adds a lashon, a very powerful lashon. The Alter Rebbe says, why are the Levim the ones that should wash the hands of the Kehanim? That they should have added level of kedusha because the Levim are called kodesh. Is the Levim are called kodesh? Kehanim are not kodesh. Because the Levim empower the Kehanim to be kodesh avarachos b'nei Yisrael. Their washing of the hands was not as it is somewhat equivalent to the eating of shira. To enable such a koyach habracha, that is through the washing of the hands that the Levim do for the Kehanim. Uli yeshleima. Al Kol Panim, with all the lamdas, what's the nekudas advarim? This idea is very much connected to the idea of Shleishim Shana. The Rebbe quoted in Tafshin Mem, the pasuk in the beginning of Yecheskel, that it was Vayhi b'shleishim shana, and he saw Giluyim Maras Elokim. He was able to experience a revelation of godliness that wasn't seen before. The Gemara discusses which one was greater, Yeshaya's Nevuah, Yecheskel, whatever. But it was a great revelation. We know what the Rambam says, that Nevi'im, in order to get to the level of Nevuah, they had to have Shira. They would get together, they would isolate themselves, and they would sing music. They would sing music. Music enabled them to transcend, to remove themselves from these physical chushim, to transcend and elevate themselves in order to get into a state of Nevuah, into a state of prophecy. Shloishim Shana is connected specifically to this level, to this inyan of Shira. It's dafka the Shloishim Shana that's connected to the inyan of Nevuah, this high revelation, the high level of Gilui, which is connected, as we said, to the Avodas Halavim, the Avodas Hashira, which is being mamshich, drawing down a level of energy that is far greater than any other level that we could attain on our own. And the connection, therefore, to this year of 30 years with Yud Beis Gimel Tammuz is that not only is Yud Beis Gimel Tammuz, as we said, Hayom Eil Niskana Benasim, that the energy is greater than it ever was, but it's the 30th year of Gimel Tammuz. That means the energy of the 30, the inyan of the Koyach is even greater. And why specifically Gimel Tammuz Tavshin and Dalet? Because we find another very interesting connection. In Tafresh Pei Zayin, it was known, Rabbi Yechaim Altes writes in his Rishimus, already from Rosh Hashanah, the Frierdiker Rebbe you could see by the Frierdiker Rebbe he was aware something was going to happen. And throughout the year, the Frierdiker Rebbe already mentioned, either to Chassidim in general, to private Chassidim, that, that he could see there was an anxiety, there was an awareness of something that was going to happen. By the Farbrengen Yutes Kislev, the Frierdiker Rebbe there spoke very strongly about the need of Mesiras Nefesh. And the Frierdiker Rebbe there says, it's coming outside later, right now is the time. Next, in a while from now, we're not going to have the same opportunity of Mesiras Nefesh. So to speak, like Chaparai now this is the only time to do Mesiras Nefesh. And later on, we're going to talk about these people that sat in Tfisa because they were the teachers and all that. Put him, Tafresh Pei Zayin, which was a moment of where you saw the Frierdiker Rebbe was very much aware that, these things are going to happen. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, the Maimer, the Kibbul HaYehudim. What's the teichen of that Maimer, the Kibbul HaYehudim? That we're in a generation that requires Mesiras Nefesh. And who's going to inspire us with Mesiras Nefesh? The Nasi Hader, the Rebbe, the Mordechai Shebederenu. And essentially, the Frierdiker Rebbe was demanding by the Chassidim to be on this level of Kosis Lamor, to be able to reach the level of Mesiras Nefesh. What's the Maimer, the last Maimer we have of the Rebbe that's Muga? Vata Tetzava. What's the whole Maimer Meyusadan? The Maimer of the Kibbul HaYehudim Tafresh Pei Zayin. But the Rebbe takes it a step further. The Rebbe doesn't satisfy with Mesiras Nefesh over there. The Rebbe says we need what's called a koyach atzmi. We need to tap into Atzmus itself. We have to go even higher and take from Atzmus and bring it down to koyach hagiluyim. He says Mesiras Nefesh fades away. And he says, as you saw by some of the Chassidim after they had their Mesiras Nefesh in Russia, they came to America, that's it faded out. But that's not where we're holding now. We're holding over Yichoi Elech Hashem and Zayizach. We're holding at a point that Rebbe says in this Maimer something very, very unbelievable. The Rebbe says that we could feel, not because of the fact that we have someone coming against us and saying you can't give a circumcision, you can't do a bris milah. Not because someone is saying you can't learn Torah. We're akshanim. So you tell us no, we'll have to fight you. Says the Rebbe that you could be in Golos. You could be in America. You could have everything you want. No one's bothering you. You could vote for Donald Trump if you want. You could have whatever you want. Kol Tuv Mitzrayim. Right? You could have whatever you want. On von deswegen, despite the fact you feel that you're not home, you feel the Golos. And if you think about it, this is an unbelievable idea. I was speaking to someone a few days ago, And he was telling me, at first the conversation started going was something like to the effect, he was saying, what does Eibusher want from us? This is an everlasting struggle. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, right? That you're just going to keep on fighting, Iskafia. He says, listen, I don't have the energy for this. We're promised all that. He says, I just want to have Gili Alakus. He says, I'm not satisfied. He says, all of these indirect messages that we get and rayas that there's an Eibusher and the fact that Eibusher takes care of us, I want the thing itself. So I said, I envy you. I said, because you're exactly what the Rebbe is talking about. That's what the Rebbe is talking about, that we could feel that it's very nice we could go to a shir, and that we could daven, and we could have a geschmack of Farbrengen, we could have all these very nice things, but we feel safe in that. We don't go to the point of saying, but this is not enough. We don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable to say, you know what, I don't want this. I want something more. I want nicht dein Gan Eden, nicht dein Elam Habach, dich allein, says the Rebbe. We could demand that we want the Etzem Alein. It's an unbelievable thing that was never heard of before. You look into the Rabbi before, they don't talk about such targets. And the Rebbe gave us this mimer to tell us that now, Gimel Tammuz, I'm empowering you. And now that we're 30 years plus, or 30 years from then, that means the koyach of the shleishim of the shira. The koyach, and there's another pshat koyach, ulay yesh leimar. Koyach in Chassidus means something else also. It doesn't just mean power. There's a concept called yechoilus, something in potential, something that could be, not potential, something that could be. And then koyach means it's already something. To the extent that we say in Ruchnius, ein koyach choser poil, that if in Ruchnius already has the koyach, already exists. Nor but then it's lacking the way it's coming down, it has to come down into the physical reality. Koyach means there's something already here, there's an avir. V'ruach alikim merachefes, says the Targum, zeruchay shal Mashiach. We are right now experiencing ruchay shal Mashiach. We see the waves and the tidal waves of Mashiach all around us. We could deny it. We could live in the hell of a Hester. We could close our eyes. Or as the Rebbe told us, we could effen in the Egen and see the truth. Remove our hell of a Hester. See that the koyach, once we see there's the koyach, it'll be the poil. The problem is sometimes we want to ignore the koyach. We want to feel safe. It's a little scary. It's a little traumatic. Mashiach, we've been promised for so long. So like all trauma, we close up. But the Rebbe told us, it's about us now. We're going to do it. It's in our power. And that's the message of Atat Tzava. So in Tafresh Pei Zayin Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe started the process. He enabled us with the Mesiras Nefesh to get us to the point of Gimel Tammuz Tafshin und Daled. And now that we're holding past Gimel Tammuz Tafshin Pei Daled, we're holding the Koyach of Shloisha, of the power of Shira, of the Koyach, the Ruchay Shal Mashiach, which is clear to everyone. It only demands that we say Ad Mosai with much more strength. Yes, we do Torah mitzvahs, but not just with a way of saying, okay, I'm going to go daven with the shir in the morning, I'm going to learn a shir chassidus, and I feel good about myself, I checked off the list. The Rebbe didn't rest for a second. As the famous story by one of the Russian government forced, we all know that they should institute secular studies into the schools, and the Rebbe Rashab fought against it very strongly. And once by one of the meetings, he spoke very harshly against the government, and he fainted, and he was house arrested. And one of the other Gedolei Yisrael that were there came into the Rebbe. He says, Lubavitch Rebbe, we're going to turn out to us we can't. We tried everything we could. And what did the Rebbe Rashab say? But the Ingen is nicht peilt gewesen. The thing didn't happen. You see by the Rebbe didn't have a moment to breathe. Because by the Rebbe there was only one thing on his mind. Taking the koyach and making it a peil. Till that point, you went past by the Rebbe, you said, I gave $3 million to this place, next time you'll give 5. Not because the Rebbe was a taskmaster, because the peil didn't happen yet. Till then, we can't be satisfied. And that's the mindset we have to live in, with the mindset that the Rebbe told us in the Oneself and the Beis, is seeing the world, the way the world is changing, the way it's v'ruach halakim erachefes zeruchay shel Mashiach. And then we'll experience the Oz Yashir, Oz Malosh and Osid, the ultimate Shira, the ultimate Koyach of Shleishim, Begula Midas HaShleim, and take of Miyad Ma'am Shulchaim. Before that, the Frierdiker Rebbe demanded this from his Chassidim. The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't just, hold it on to himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe demanded this from his Chassidim. I heard recently, I don't know where exactly the source, I'm sure others know the source, that the Belza, the Rabbanim from Belza said, as when it comes to Mesiras Nefesh, we can all learn from all seinen Talmidim or something to that extent of the Lubavitch Rebbe, huh? Tzimkevis Lubavitch. In other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe personified to the world what Mesiras Nefesh is all about. One of the more obvious elements of the Mesiras Nefesh was, as we said before, when communism took hold, so there was a lot of uncertainty as to where the country was going to go. But one of the things the communists were very keen on was to destroy any elements of religion, period. They try to get rid of the calendar and change the calendar. And as we said, one of the things that happened is that in the communities where you had the Rabbanim, who basically were the whole community ran by the Rav of the community, they left their positions, they left their posts. And there's letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe where you could see that the Frierdiker Rebbe was astonished that how could a Rav just leave his position like that he was in a position to lead a community and now it's just, And the Frierdiker Rebbe therefore took it upon himself to make sure that these communities had Rabbanim, as we said before, Shachtim, etc. But in many ways, it was many of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Chassidim that paid the ultimate price, that they actually Mesiras Nefesh v'poil, that it came to a point where they actually were Mesiras Nefesh mamish. The Rebbe asks a question in the Sikha. The Rebbe asks that Beis Tammuz, Frierdiker Rebbe and Frierdiker Rebbe got the news. It was like 5 Maimorim that the Frierdiker Rebbe said in that time. Beis, Gimel, and the Shabbos. And Beis Tammuz, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said the Maimer Vavayish Hoyli Be'ezri, which L'chura is, the Rebbe asks, L'chura is the Indian of the future promise that the Eibush is going to take care of us. And the next day and the following, the Frierdiker Rebbe said the Maimer Baruch HaGoyim L'Chayim Tevis, that the Frierdiker Rebbe acknowledged about the HaGoyim. So the Rebbe says that seemingly it should have been the other way around. First, you acknowledge and thank the Eibishter for the saving, which is what HaGoyim is, and then you talk about the future. Why is it that it was done the other way around? So the Rebbe says something there very, very interesting. The Rebbe says that really the biggest miracle of the whole story of Beis and the Gimel Tammuz wasn't that the Frierdiker Rebbe was freed. It was the fact that the people that were involved in getting him freed, nothing happened to them. That was the miracle. That he had people, the Rebbe himself was involved, obviously the Beis Harav and many other Chassidim, and even non-Jews and non-religious Jews and non-Jews were involved. And you're dealing with a government that had no problem with killing anybody, and yet not one person was injured or had any negative effect from being involved in this situation. Says the Rebbe, that was the miracle. So the Rebbe the Rebbe says that, without getting into the whole depth of the Sikha, but the Rebbe there says that the Frierdiker Rebbe was acknowledging Havayli Ba'izri, that one could ask the question, where did the real salvation come from? Where did the real Yeshua come from? Was it through the means of these individuals that were able to influence, whether it was different governments in Europe and America, and put pressure on the Russians? Or was it, obviously the Eibishter? And therefore, the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted to make it clear, as he explains in that Maimer, that everything came from Emitis Emotzei, everything was the Eibishter. That the whole miracle came only from the Eibishter. Which, in other words, means not that we're not acknowledging that other people were involved, but the Rebbe says the fact that the Eibishter was the one that was involved in this process, like you have by Yitzias Mitzrayim, V'nigla Aleim Kvei Hashem, that the Eibishter himself took them out of Mitzrayim. And when you have the revelation of Amitas Himotzoi, at that point, for sure, these people that were just doing their job, Al Pi Teva, they shouldn't have been able to be hurt. So in other words, what the Rebbe there says is that they weren't really going on Mesiras Nefesh. Because they were in the teva that they were living in, the fact that the Eibusher, the fact that there was a revelation of Amidas Imatzei, the ultimate truth of the world, which is that the Eibusher runs the world, and Eidei Mulvadai, so these people couldn't be hurt, couldn't be damaged. It's on the other hand, you have a Sikh of the Rebbe where the Rebbe talks about by Purim. The Rebbe asks the question, the Gemara asks the question, why did the Yidden deserve to be annihilated on Purim, in the days of Chashverosh? What Aveda did they do already that they deserve to be completely annihilated? So the Gemara goes through one suggestion that they ate from the Sudas HaChasherish. But the Gemara says that's enough for the people in Shushan. What about for the rest? The Gemara says they bow down to the Nebuchadnezzar, whatever it is. But the Rebbe says that the Gemara doesn't reject the fact that they ate from the Sudas HaChasherish, and the Rebbe therefore says that must have been the main reason why they deserve to be that Lash Milad Labed Kola Yehudim. And the Rebbe there asks the question, is the punishment, does it match up to the crime? Or does the crime match up to the punishment? Because they ate from the Suda of Achashverosh, that's why they deserve to be completely annihilated? And the Rebbe says, it wasn't a punishment. It was a natural consequence. It was a natural reaction. Parenthetically, B'chlal, Levi Yedua, when it comes to educating or parenting, sometimes we think we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we trying to educate? Are we trying to empower our students? Are we trying to empower our children? Or are we trying to punish them? Are we giving them a consequence through which they're learning from something? Or just because we feel a certain need to be in control, so we're giving them a punishment? So the Rebbe says, Abish didn't punish you. It wasn't a punishment. You didn't listen to me, so therefore I'm going to annihilate you. Rather, the Rebbe says that the Yidden are kisva achas, they're a single sheep amongst Shirim Zevim, as the Medrash says, 70 wolves, that al pi teva, the way the world is set up is that the Yidden shouldn't exist. If not for the special Shmira Miyuchedes, special protection that Eibusher gives the Yidden, otherwise the Yidden shouldn't be existing. So all the Yidden had to do was tell the Eibusher, we don't need your protection. You know, we'll sign up for Achashverosh's protection. We need Donald Trump to win the elections. We don't need it. We're satisfied with that achateva. Right? Says the Eibusher, okay. You don't want the Shmira Miyuchedes. You don't want the Shmira Miyuchedes. I'm sorry for disappointing the Trump fans in the crowd. But you don't want the Shmira Miyuchedes, so says the Eibusher, okay. And therefore, the result, the consequences were that there could be a gzeira, not because the gzeira was a punishment, because it was a natural consequence. So al derech zeh, similarly, the other way around, the Rebbe says that when it came to from the arrest of the Frierdiker Rebbe in Sivan, all the way through the period of time of the debate at Gimel Tammuz, it wasn't pshat that the Yidden and the people that were involved in the process were going on Mesilas Nefesh. Was that they were doing something against the nature, that there was a big miracle that they survived. When you have the revelation of Eidei Mulvadei, of course you're going to survive. You just become shluchim. But the Rebbe there explains something very, very important in this process. There's two ways that you could be doing the mission in this world. There's two ways that you could be a shliach. There's two ways you could go on your mission in this world. One way is where you're doing it for yourself. What does it mean for yourself? So the Rebbe mentions this in a different sikha. The Rebbe asks the question that if you look in the letter, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that in the Maimorim of Rosh Hashanah, he mentioned about the idea of Hashgacha Pratis, the Chiddush of Hashgacha Pratis Baal Shem Tov, and he says with that, he was able to survive the Yisurim, the pain and all that of being in prison. So the Rebbe goes through a whole series of questions he doesn't understand. What's the connection to Dafka the Hashgacha Pratis of the Baal Shem Tov, the Chiddush of the Hashgacha Pratis Baal Shem Tov? For those of you who know, right, the Baal Shem Tov was revolutionized our approach of Hashgacha Pratis. If you look in the Rishonim, the idea of Hashgacha Pratis, let's take the Rambam, there's hashkachas hamin, that every species is going to, there's hashkach on the general min, and by the yidin there may be a little bit more of a special hashkacha. The Ramban says that on certain tzaddikim there's more of hashkacha, but this idea of hashkacha pratis, even to the extent as that if the leaf that falls off the tree is falling off exactly, and all that, the Rishonim didn't hold of that. The Baal Shem Tov came along and said that not only by man is there a special hashkacha pratis, but even on the Daimim Sameach and Chai, in every level of creation, every aspect of creation, there's a special hashkacha pratis. So the Rebbe asks, it doesn't sound, what's the connection between knowing about that and that's why he didn't suffer, feel the pain, or he's able to handle the pain? But more than that, the Rebbe asks, he says, he doesn't understand why the Frierdiker Rebbe felt like there was pain. He says, we know Rabbi Akiva, when it came to Rabbi Akiva's time for Mesiras Nefesh, he was very excited. He didn't feel the pain. For him, he was thinking about Masay Yavi Biyadi Vakamena. Right? When will I be able to do this, says the Gemara in Barachas. So he says that Rabbi Akiva was excited about it, and now you're complaining? To be Moshe Nefesh, that should be the greatest chus. And the Rebbe goes through a series of explanations, but the Rebbe there says that the idea of Avram Avinu, there's a difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Avram Avinu's Mesiras Nefesh. Rabbi Akiva's Mesiras Nefesh was a sense of self-fulfillment. It wasn't that Rabbi Akiva thought he was doing something for himself. Right? He wasn't doing Mesiras Nefesh because he thought it was a good idea, for his self-growth, or self-esteem, exactly. That's not why he did it. He believed in it because of the fact that he knew that the Eibishter, this is the best way to connect to the Eibishter. But in many ways, it was similar to Nadav and Avihu, that they wanted to come close. They wanted Kalois HaNefesh. However, by Avram Avinu, that wasn't his objective. His objective was to be Megala, to reveal Elokus in the world. He set up shop. He wanted to be there, even to when he was sick. He wanted that there should be what? There should be guests that he could tell them. He wanted that there should be a spreading of Elokus in the world. And just parenthetically to this point, in a different place that Rebbe speaks about, the question that Ramban asks, you don't find anything about Avram Avinu until Parshas Lech Lecha. Right? Lech Lecha comes along, and all of a sudden there's Vayemer, Lech Lecha. Who's this Avram that we're talking about? He's 75 or 70 years old, different shittas, whatever, however old he was. Who is he? There's a whole story of Orkastim. We don't know anything about this. So the Rebbe says, it's very simple. Avram Avinu, before the Eibusher told him Lech Lecha, he was doing something from himself. He discovered a God. He discovered that there's one true God, that there's Hikadas Beire, as the Rambam says. He recognized that there's an Eibusher, so he got excited. Guess what? When you come up with a great idea, you also get excited and spread it to everybody. It may not be selfish, it may not be self-driven from a negative place, but it's not coming from the Eibusher. It's not you doing it for the Eibusher. But when the Eibusher then tells you, now Lech Lecha Ma'artzecha, get out of your comfort zone and now do it, that's a whole different story already. Now you become Avram Avinu. Avram Oyavi. Echot Avram. Now you become into a different darga. So Avram Avinu wasn't thinking about himself at all. As the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, that by Avram there's different dargas and Avos Hashem. There's different levels of loving the Eibusher. Loving the Eibusher doesn't necessarily mean that you have a warm feeling inside. Avos Hashem, especially the way the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the baseline of Avos Hashem is Ava HaMevi L'dei Maisa, right? Says Alter Rebbe. The Iker is what? That you should do action. In other words, the Ava, the love, is a motivator. So Alter Rebbe says in Perek Daled that if you do not have Ava V'Yira, Ein boy kiyum. There's no kiyum to your mitzvahs. In other words, in any relationship, you have to have a motivator to be involved in that relationship. Otherwise, it's empty. The action is empty. It doesn't have a kiyum. So in our relationship with the Eibusher, which our relationship with the Eibusher is the same parallels in the sense that just like the Eibusher created that we sense a relationship the way it is between Bein Adam L'Chaved is the same way between Adam L'Amokim, as Shir Hashirim Shkodesh HaKadoshim tells us that relationship is that we need to have a certain motivator, a certain drive and ava. But there's many levels in Avos Hashem. Many, many levels. The Rambam lays out 3 levels. There's a whole Zirkind on that itself. So we know there's a Zirkind on everything. But The Rambam there says that Avram Avinu's avodah was oisa emes b'bnei shu emes. There was nothing about himself involved. He came to a point where it was totally because this was the truth. It wasn't I'm doing it because I want to come closer to Hashem. I want to do it because I want to, it's like in a human relationship, there's times, let's say you do something for your spouse. And your spouse realizes the reason you're doing it is because you want to make them happy. So fine, that may be a nice thing, maybe a good thing, but it doesn't feel as genuine as if you just do it on some level because that person wants you to. Instead of you wanting to feel closer, that you made them happy, the fact is that you did it because they wanted you to do it on some levels even higher. But that's the difference between an avodah of a tzaddik and an avodah of about tshuva, whatever. About tshuva, the Rebbe says, in my Melbourne Beis, that about tshuva's avodah is much deeper because he's fighting himself. To have a relationship with someone that you like is not a chiddush. To be involved in a relationship with the Eibishter and understand the Eibishter, who the Eibishter is, right? So the chassid came to the Tzemach Tzedek saying, or whoever it was, that said he doesn't know that there's an Eibishter. So he asked him, do you know if there's a Zar? So he said, of course I know there's a Zar. He says, how do you know if there's a Zar? He says, because my brother, does a lot of business and he's gone to Petersburg and he's met up with all the big knockers, the aristocracy over there, and they tell about the Zar. So the Tzemach says, aha, that's how you know there's a Zar. He says, believe me, I know there's an Eibishter. Right? But the Taka the Tzemach Tzedek, he can believe him. There's an Eibishter. But good for him. Right? The tzaddikim that experience, and for sure the others that the Gemara says that that they were able to experience it on the highest of levels. But for us, the gilui, that we don't have that gilui, right? We don't get to experience and know the Eibishter on this level. So in that regard, says the Rebbe, the avodah of about tshuva, in this regard, any yid that does a mitzvah today is really going against the nature. What relationship with what? With who? What are you having a relationship with? Not only that, some people have tainus to the Eibishter. October 7th, Hayitachin. You want to have a relationship with Hazah Eibishter? I don't like this person. I go out with a person, I date them, I don't like them, I don't marry them. I'm forced in a relationship I don't like? That sounds abusive. So on some level, when we do, it's a much greater doing. That doing of the Mesiras Nefesh type of doing, so to speak, of the Mesiras Nefesh or the Avodah of the Baalei Tshuva or the Kabbalah cells on a much more greater level. And we see it within human experience. So the baseline Ava may be in a very, very high level. But Avraham Avinu experienced the level of Oisa Emes, B'nei Shu Emes. There was nothing about himself involved in it at all. It wasn't that I'm doing something, the Yesh Mi She'oyev, as we know the Siddur talks about. I'm the one who loves. It was the truth, so he did the truth. End of story. So says the Rebbe, when it comes to Avraham Avinu, the fact that Avraham Avinu brings down that Avraham Avinu was also at some point held back from doing his avodah. So it caused him pain. Why did it cause him pain? Because this is not what he wants to do. He doesn't want to be held back in his avodah. Right? That's not what he wanted to do. Avraham Avinu didn't want to do that. Avraham Avinu wanted to be able to do his avodah. What's his avodah? Spread Yiddishkeit. Likewise, the Friedrich Rebbe, what was the whole kol kuli of the Friedrich Rebbe? What was his whole mission in life? To spread Yiddishkeit. So when you're locked up in prison, the greatest pain is you can't do your job. There's no greater pain than that. That's why he felt the pain. And the Rebbe continues in the theme of that. But going back to the Sikha before that, I said, the Rebbe there explains that there's one way you could do an avodah. You could serve the Eibishter. You could do your shluchus. And it's something that you're doing because you see the purpose in it. You appreciate the purpose in it. It has meaning to you. For some people, they have today born from birth, right? You're brought up religious. You're brought up with Torah mitzvahs. So either you have a feeling, you don't have a feeling for it. But al kol panim, you will know what it's about. You have some experience, maybe, it's a mistake, by the way. Some people think that because they were brought up, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, the Mishnah says, they have to know what to tell a person who's an apikotis. An apikotis is someone who denies, whatever, simple pshat. Apikotis is someone who denies that the Eibishter gave the Torah, mitzvahs, and all that. So the Gemara there says, Rabbi Yechon says, that's talking about goyim. That Masher Toshel Abikoidis is talking about a goy. But by a yid, don't get into the conversation with him. The Pakri Tvei. What does it mean, the Pakri Tvei? So Rashi there says, because he thinks he's already experienced it all. So whatever you're going to tell him, he's going to come up with another answer to fight you on it. Right? Sometimes we think we've experienced Yiddishkeit because we were brought up in it. So we know what it's all about. But we've never really matured in our Yiddishkeit. We've never really taken it serious. We've never really opened the book and studied it and meditated on it and actually practiced it with a feeling. It's just been, we grow up that way, so we stay that way. So if I was brought up Amish, I'll be Amish. I was brought up religious Jew, I'm a Jew. And I'm not taking away Chas v'Shalom Adarab, like we said before, on some level that's even a higher level. But at the same time, there's a certain element of where a person could be serving the Eibishter and their feeling of the connection is not there at all. Mitzvahs anoshim ulumad. I was brought up a certain way, so I do it that way. Why do I do it? I don't think twice about it. Or if I think twice about it, I get scared, so I shut it down and I keep on going. Then there are people that actually they actually do get connected on some level. And there's moments, we all have moments where we feel connected, whether it's a Yom Kippur, an Eilah, whether it's other times, a birthday, Hesedus, Milamayla, whatever it may be, there's times that we feel a certain connection to the Eibishter and Torah mitzvahs. And that's a very fleeting experience by most of us. It doesn't really last very long. But there's a feeling, we do feel some connection to the Eibishter. And those times, those feelings drive us, they motivate us, they energize us, they make us feel, involved. Once, one of my Talmidim, after he was finished davening, he says, I had such a geschmack of davening today. I could eat a horse for breakfast. So I said, if that's what you're feeling is, Mistam is nicht gedaven, that's very good. If you leave davening feeling like now you're hungry, that you could eat a horse, is Mistam, that's not the experience of davening, of Shivchi Kamayim Libeich Ad Mitzvah Nefesh. But anyway, the point is sometimes we have, as a Chassidus talks about the Nyein Shav, whatever it is, we're not going to get into all of the different types of relationships we can have with the Eibishter, but there's different experiences we could all have, and some of them taka, but it all comes from a place, a lot of them, most of them, come from a place that I feel good about it. And when I feel good about it, I'm involved, and I'm not. Today, in the world we live in today, the psycho-conscious age that we live in today, everybody talks about it, you have to do what you're interested and like doing. Right? If you like it, you do it. If you don't like it, don't do it, because then it's traumatic for you. We spoke about this Shabbos Shuvah, that the Rebbe said that the problem with this generation is, and instead of asking vos, they ask farvos, right? Everything is why, and we have to understand it, we have to explain it. The idea of doing something, the Rebbe says, why did he start Tzivus Hashem? Is because he was trying to think to himself, what could be something that, what could he design? Someone was asking, a psychologist wrote into the Rebbe, why are you making children as if they're in an army? Right? My children run around, they're excited about the Israelis. So he says this idea is not healthy for children. So the Rebbe says, I thought long and hard about it. He says, but there's only one model that I can think of that children should be educated in, is the way they educate you in the army. They don't give you reasons. You do. Now, I'm not going to get into now the whole psychology about people who struggle with it. What I'm saying is that there's a sense that we have, okay, if I feel it, that means it's a raya, it's true. If you feel it, it's a raya, it's true. If I don't feel it, it's a raya, it's not true. No, when you feel it, it means you feel yourself. The only truth that you're acknowledging is the fact that you feel yourself. You exist. I think, therefore I am. I feel, therefore I think the relationship is true. It's when you have your young child, your 2-year-old or 1-year-old or your infant child that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning screaming. You don't say, now I'm really being a good parent. I push it feel so geschmack right now. You get out of bed with Azaz Rizus and Achayis, you push it can't fall back asleep afterwards from such excitement. It's usually not the way it works. So it's not the feeling that counts in that sense. Again, there's dargis here, So there's some people, the way they serve the Eibishter, the way they connect to the Eibishter, the way, it's dependent on their moods. It's dependent on their feelings. And when it's dependent on your feeling, it's dependent on the way you feel about something, so then you're not fully engaged in the relationship. If you tell your wife, today I'm not really interested in our relationship, let's take a break. I'm not feeling it today. Or your wife tells you, I'm not feeling it today. Or you tell your son, today I'm not really feeling connected to you. I mean, these ideas just sound ridiculous. Right? Comes along Avraham Avinu, comes along the Frierdiker Rebbe and tells us and teaches us that what's the true avodah of serving the Eibush is not about you at all. It's not about you. It's about the inyan, the thing that has to happen. This is ani nivreisi l'shamish eskaini, or ani loy nivreisi elo l'shamish eskaini. I'm here for one purpose. It's very hard to fathom this idea. We hear it a lot. My father-in-law's gesund. He was going to speak. I think I've shared this here in the past. He was going to speak in the Torah asked him to speak for the Mesivta Bachram a number of years ago. So he was trying to think, how is he going to connect to the Mesivta Bachram? Some of you know he has a good koyach hapet to explain chassidus and things like that. To Mesivta Bachram, what is he going to tell them? So he was thinking about it. So he came up with a very good idea. He said he's going to explain to them how even if you don't necessarily appreciate chassidus, you've been pickling your chassidus for a long time. The thing seeps into your bones. You've been pickling it for years, right? You've been sitting and learning it. Somehow it seeps in on some level. So all of us have been, it seeped into us this consciousness of the idea of, doing avodah, and it's about not about you, it's about the avodah. A lot of these ideas, so to speak, we heard it already, But let's think about it for a second. What does that mean? What does it mean to have a relationship with the Eibush on a level that it's not about how you feel, and you do it because this is the right thing? Like waking up 3 o'clock in the morning because your baby is crying. You don't think about, this is a right thing to do right now, therefore I'm doing it. The Rebbe Rashab talks in Kuntas Atzila. He says that there's different levels in davening. You start off, and there's certain levels in days, and Pad V'Shalom and Tafrei Samach, he talks about it more barichas, that you start off the day, the first level is a nafshi level. You don't feel that connected, right? You wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? You want to go back to sleep. You're not really interested in anything when you wake up in the morning. Right? And from there evolves eventually some level of ruach, where you start feeling a certain emotional attachment, etc., etc., etc. But if you don't get past the nafshi, if you don't get into the nafshi sticker level, the moida'ani, the very beginning level, say, I gotta do this because this is me, regardless of how I feel about it, they'll never get to the next level. That means the yesod and the foundation is that it's not about me. So says the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, that was the Frierdiker Rebbe's experience. And the Rebbe says that was the experience of all the people that were Mesiras Nefesh with the Frierdiker Rebbe. The reason why they're able to experience such a level of Avaya Liba Oizri, the idea of Yamidis Matzoi, why could they experience? Because there was nothing of themselves in it. They weren't doing it because of any personal satisfaction. There's a Maimer of the Rebbe on Parshas Mishpatim where he goes through many levels of Shaloi Lishma. Some of us will think those levels of Shaloi Lishma are Mamish Lishma. And the Rebbe goes from one level to the other, showing you how none of those are, they're still Shaloi Lishma, it's still about yourself. Even if you're doing it l'shem to connect to the Eibishter, that's still Shaloi Lishma. Oysa Emes Beish Emes is a whole different level. L'shem Yichud Kutchabrichu Shechinte is also Shaloi Lishma according to that. Which in other words means that when we want to have a proper pool, a poil mamish, what does this mean for us? We're not in we're in a different space on some levels, and a different country, and a different reality, a different time. But in many ways, there's elements of what the Frierdiker Rebbe was fighting against or fighting for that we're dealing with today. And that's basic Yiddishkeit. Basic Torah mitzvahs. Basic Judaism. Kashrus. Tefillin. Shabbos. These are things that Ein Bayish Ein Boy V'chulu. We all know that these are the basic things that we're all fighting against, that we're all trying to hold up to. And we want to be able to Be mevasas a kehila, to establish a community, to establish our lives and our children's lives, to be able to educate them, to be able to make them into to give them the approach, to give them the levels of connection that we want them to connect to. We want them to be able to feel a certain kesher, a certain connection to the emes. So what does that require from us? What does that demand from us? Was monzich. Was monzich is get yourself out of the way. It's not about you. We don't pass on to Yiddishkeit to our children because that's the way we were brought up. We pass on Yiddishkeit to our children because that's the emes. And there's a very big difference between the two. If we pass on Yiddishkeit because that's the way we were brought up, that's called a fear. You're doing it because you don't know anything else. And you're afraid to shake the boat. If you're passing it on because it's emes, your child will see it's emes. And how do they see when it's emes? Because you get out of the way. And collectively, when we all have that, there's no personal natias. It's not about what I want. It's about the inyan. Then you have Borcheinu Avinu Klanu Kiyachot Berepenecha. You have the level of Amitas Imotzi of Einei Blavate. And then it's not Mesiras Nefesh anymore. See, it's Mesiras Nefesh when there's still an episode zich there. There's still some self in it. There's still something there. That's why the Rebbe says in the Ma'aravat Tetzaveh that the Yidden, that after Russia, after they left, they could go back. Why? Because it never really transformed them. There was still always a zich. There was always an eye. There was something there. That's not what the Rebbe demands from us. The Rebbe demands from us a koyach atzmi. It's not about us. Shlichus, going out in the world, doesn't mean that a person gets involved in something because he's going to build an empire. How many people is he going to bring into his Chabad house? That's not the purpose of shlichus. I'm not saying that, at the beginning with maybe I need the Shmina Shebeshminis. You could have, there's a Sikha the Rebbe where it discusses whether we hold of the Shmina Shebeshminis or not. Right? The Gemara says that you need to have the 1/16 of Yeshus to get it going, right? Maybe, but for those who need it, fine. But the point is that that's not the vision. That's not the purpose. The purpose is not where am I going to become something. It's about the inning that has to happen. So Memela, taking the lessons from Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, and as we said before, it's this year, Vahi B'Shleishim Shana, the koiches that we have, the inyan of Shira. The idea of Shira is inyan of Ratzi V'Shoiv. Ratzi V'Shoiv, the Alter Rebbe explains in Perek Nun of Tanya that Ratzi V'Shoiv is the idea of where a person realizes that it's not just about running away and getting excited, but when he reaches that excitement, shuv, got to do peil mamish. You got to act on it. You can sit by a Farbrengen and you can say, wow, that was brilliant. You feel inspired. But if you don't do anything, if there's no peil mamish from it, if you don't see this as truth, then it's all ratzui. And ratzui takes you nowhere. The ratzui has to leave to shuv, otherwise the ratzui wasn't an emes ratzui. And that's shira. There's minors and majors. Minor notes and major notes. You need to have that interplay between both. Memela, this year, on this Yom Tif, by Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, we're empowered. And this is the most important factor that we have to really realize. We're empowered, and that's the Maimer of the Rebbe says in the Maimer of the Tzava. The fact that the Tzemach Tzedek was able to tell us that what the Alter Rebbe used to say periodically or very often, Ich will nicht dein Gan Eden, ich will nicht dein Olam Haba, ich will nur dich allein. That means we can all demand that. That means we could all sense the truth. We could all be living a life of truth, not because it's how it feels, not because we understand so much. That's also good. Adarabah. But know it's the truth and pass it on because it's the truth. And when we live in that realm, then we have the ultimate Barucheinu and the ultimate Gula Mitzvah Shleim L'chaim. A good thing is actually not a good thing. It's actually farkeret. Right? What does the Gemara say about a choila? That a choila thinks what's good for him is really not good for him. We're in a situation in Heintige Derd, in our generation today, is that there's a lot of things that's available to us. There's a lot of things available to us that we don't even realize are dangerous. We don't even realize they're dangerous. And we can get into prate pratim, but I think it's moving me'ela of what we're talking about today. I mean, the simplest, easiest thing to talk about is the technology addiction that we all deal with today. Pashut pshat. Is it a sakana or not? Right? Some people will say there's no sakana involved. Right? You know, the Rebbe explains that what was the chet of Adam and Chava? The chet of Adam and Chava, the shaila is, the Rebbe asks, by Adam and Chava, they were punished because they added shmira. The Eibusher said, don't eat from the fruit. But then either Adam or Chava, different shittas, who said to who that there's an Isser Negiah. They're not allowed to touch the fruit also. So they added chumras on it. So because of that, they led down the path of, and that's where the whole, the chet came about. So the Rebbe asks, why is that any different than the inyan of Nedarim? We're learning now in Rambam, Shloisha Prakim, we're learning Hilchos Nazirus, Hilchos Nedarim and Nazirus. Why is it any different than a Neder? Taka, the Gemara speaks in the Darim, the Gemara says, and the Rambam brings it at the end over there, to make a Neder is Ki'ilu Bonabama, V'kala Makayim Nidra is Ki'ilu Hikriv Karbona, V'chulu, V'chulu, it's not the best thing, but at the same time, there's also a time and place for a friend. By a Nazir, he's called B'nai Nevi'im, the Gemara says, that a Nazir could be a very holy thing to be a Nazir. I brings a Karban Chatos, okay, so that B'lezer HaKafir, the Gemara brings, that is whatever. So the question is, when is the right balance? When do we put on restrictions on ourselves, and when don't we? That's the shayla that Rebbe asks. In other words, Adam and Chava put on restrictions, it was a bad thing. Nazirus is a good thing. So when do we do what? So the Rebbe says, and obviously not exactly these Oisius, it really depends. Are you in control of it, or it's control of you? Is it Heim b'l'reshus libam or Heim or libam b'reshusam? Which one is it? If the thing is in your control, Adam and Chava were Yitzir Kapah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They had the koyach to use the fruit, not to eat, but there's many other usages of the fruit. It didn't have to be to eat. There was other possibilities to use it out for gute Sachen. They didn't realize that. They were too scared. They were too afraid. They didn't want to touch it. But then there's a time where a person has to realize that taka, it's a sakana. For you, the thing that matters is going to take you over. You're not in control of it. It controls you. And when it controls you, l'poel mamish, any birurim, any refinement, any element of birur that you could do with it, people say the phone, to listen to shiurim, I can watch Rebbe videos on it, and a chanami, 100%. But are you in control of it, or it's in control of you? Right? This is, dugma achas, right? We could take many examples of this today. That the reality is that we're living in a day that we don't even begin to realize necessarily where the pitfall is, where the sakon is. We don't even realize that necessarily this is dangerous. So in certain ways, we're even in a greater situation, a worse situation. The famous Mara, the Rebbe, Ba'laylo Tov Shalamet Beis, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe asks the Shayla, why does it say Ba'laylo Hahu? Ba'laylo Hu is both a double negative, right? Laila means night, Hahu means that, it means something you don't know, it's unclear. So why does the person say Ba'laylo Hu, which means it was not only it was night, but it was Hahu, you didn't even know which one it was. Both the inyan of choshech, both the inyan of lack of knowledge. So the Rebbe says, Taka, the Yidden living through this man of Achashverosh, were Taka, Ba'laylo Hu. They didn't even realize they were on Golus. They didn't even realize. Sometimes you tell someone, you're going through a tsar, you're going through a struggle, okay, so there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Some people don't know they're in a tunnel. The Mittel Rebbe gives the mashal of the the shadows of the purple, the people in the dungeon, right, that see the shadows. Right? What do you know of the real world? People in the dungeon, they could be there for generations, they think that's the ganze Welt. They don't know anything more. In our generation, we don't even necessarily know what the real truth is. We're not aware of the truth even to some extent, on some level. So for us, it's not the same situation as Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Tov Reish Pei Zayin. Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Tov Shin Pei Daled is a different type of situation. What's the chiluk? The very first maimer that the Rebbe said on Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Shin Yud Aleph is on the maimer that the pasuk Nasata L'Recha Neis L'Sneinis. In that maimer, the Rebbe basically repeated the Chazet Iber, the maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. But the Rebbe, like in all maimerim, the Rebbe was machadish in the maimer. In Kaimakayme, we're not going to go through. The Rebbe has a very big chiddush in that maimer. But the point is, what does the Frierdiker Rebbe say? What's the point? Then the previous generations, they couldn't deal with nisyonis. It says that the Der Hamidbar, which is the Der Deya, as soon as the Nisyonin came, they fell apart. We read it last week in Pirkei Avos. What does it say? That the Yidden were tested the Eibishers at Eser Pa'amim V'lei Shama B'Keili, right? The Yidden tested the Eibisher 10 times. They couldn't handle any of these things, right? So Charnu was Hadog Asher Noich V'Mitzrayim. They enjoyed the fish. The salmon was good there. The sushi was good, right? They couldn't handle, when a moment of crisis came up, they couldn't handle it. But the Iker Vart there that the Rebbe points out is that there's a chiluk between Birurim and Nisyonis. What's the difference between Birurim and Nisyonis? A Birur means something you're aware of, something that you could know, you could see the problem, you understand the problem, and you see how to refine the problem, how to rectify it, how to be mavad it. Right? You see, Lamashal, that you have a midah ra, you have kas, you get angry. So what do you do if you get angry? So some people take medication. The Rambam says, there you go, you go to the other edge. Right? There's a certain avoid you do on yourself, a certain birur, a certain self-refinement. Certain things that we could recognize, we know how to deal with them, they're clear. Right? As the Rambam says, Kashem, just like that there's a reifa when it comes to the guf, there's a reifa of the nefesh as well. And everybody has a chiyuv to go to a psychologist, the Rambam says. Hilchos Deis. Klada didn't show in Rambam. Right? I didn't make it up. So you stayed there. Maybe beginning Perek Dal, Perek I don't remember exactly where it's at. Perek Alpha Beis. Hilchos Deis. Feidish Rambam. Al Kopanim, and then when you learn the Shmeina Prakim, he talks about it even more over there. But Al Kopanim, the point is that there is See, it's interesting that Rambam in the Shmeina Prakim over there, he shows you that Takef Arshtanen, these machlas very well. He explains it in a way that it's very clear what's healthy and what's unhealthy. It's kedai to learn it. Over there in the Hakdama to the Perek, the Shmeina Prakim is the Hakdama to his Pirush and Mishachtas Avos. So in Perek Dal, Perek He explains the pshat and what does it mean Efshi and when do we say Efshi, right? Some people say Taki Efshi and certain things, not everything do you say Efshi. Anyway, the point is that there's a concept of birurim. Birurim means that we could refine ourselves. We could take something and we could find the chesaron and we could try to be mashlim it and help it and work it through. We know what the issue is. And what is required? What's required is to deal with the birur, right? And the Lashon Achsidus is that you have to mislavish b'levushay hamizbarer. You have to get into the matter. You have to get into the issue, right? In the sichos and the maimarim of Pada B'Shalom of Yutas Kislev and Yud Kislev, the Rebbe talks about this barichas, that the way you deal with the problem is sort of recognizing the problem, understanding the problem. Be mizlavish means you get yourself knowledgeable, understanding what the problem is, and you go to Levushay HaMizbarer, and then you fix the problem. That's birurim. But then there's a whole different ball game, a whole different story, which is called nisyonis. And nisyon means there's nothing to work with. There's nothing to work with. It's an obstacle. It's something that comes around in your mind. Maybe there's no Eibishter. Maybe not. Maybe Torah mitzvahs is shtusim. Maybe Mashiach's not coming. That's in the Soyin. Who says I really have to keep Shabbos azoi b'hidur? Who says I have to make sure that the food I'm eating is with the b'tachlis ahidur? Maybe not. Who made it up anyway? The rabbis made it up. The rabbanim. The rabbanon. I tell my bochum that gets smicha by me. I say, don't leave smicha knowing tzveika the rabban l'kula. That's not the that's not the be all and end all of Yeredeya. They know svek sveika l'kula and sveika the rabban l'kula, and everything becomes a svek sveika. Svek sveika is on what they learned maybe, but it's a different story. You also have a svek sveika l'chumra. Anyway, the point is that an asayin is something that you don't have what to work with. It's something that comes at you without any warning, without anything to be typhus, anything to hold on to. And so how do you fight such a thing? In asayin, the way an asayin works is either it makes you or it breaks you. I was speaking to my older brother. He learned here in the Smicha program, Rabbi is here, so I asked him before I came, I joined the program, I said, what do you think about going? He says, listen, I can tell you about the program, Rabbi 5 to 11. He says, either he'll make you or will break you. Right? Either you'll come out on top or you'll feel broken. Certain things in life either make you or break you. Right? An nisayin is something that either you break it or it breaks you. So how do you deal with an nisayin? Says the Frierdiker Rebbe that you need to have such a thing called teikef atzmi, koyach atzmi. What does koyach atzmi mean? You have to work with yourself to believe in yourself very strongly. You have to know what's right. You have to know that this is, as we said before, the emes, and you don't budge. We have an inner compass. We have an inner sense of knowledge. We have something that is telling us what's right and what's wrong. We say every day in the morning, so by the sechvi has the bina. Doesn't take too much to understand, right? But ein havdalah el ladas, the Gemara in Yerushalmi says. That's why the Gemara asks, why do you have the bracha of havdalah and atachayin? Because ein havdalah el ladas. Yeah? What's the chiluk between anoisim lasech vivin and ein havdalah ladas? To know the difference between day and night is a klad zach, it's an offen zach. It's clear to you. So even a sechvi, the chicken knows the difference. But to be mavdil bein Torah l'tamei, right? The Rambam learns that there's a mitzvah, that the mitzvah of the Torah is lahavdil bein atomei la Torah. The beginning of Hilchos Macholos Asudas, the Rambam learns is that the mitzvah is to actually know what's tummy and Torah. Not necessarily to eat the Torah versus the tummy. I'm sorry, to not eat the tummy and to eat the Torah. But lahavchin, it takes avchana. So Chassidus talks about the idea of b'chochma yisberu. To be able to mevader something, to be able to know of something, it takes a level of deep recognition, a certain level of das. We have naturally, as a ben Adam, u'moisar ha'adam min ha'behema is oyin. Oyin, that darga of oyin or ayin, the level of knowledge of something that we know that this is right and this is wrong, is natural to us. A child is born naturally to know that there's such a thing called right and wrong. What exactly is right and wrong? Sometimes he has to be told that this is that some things are confusing. He has to have the das to know. But once we get older enough, we have it. Sometimes we have to work more on it. As Alter Rebbe says in Farbrengen Beis of Tanya, to reach the das, right? Shaila, the Gemara asks that right? The Gemara says that the Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Yidden, what does the Eibusher want from you? To serve him. That's the only thing. He's only asking him to fear the Yidden. In fact, the Gemara, is that a small deal, right? So you have the Moshe Rabbeinu. So you have the Shaila. So everybody asks the Shaila. So how did you answer the question, right? How did he answer the question? Is it only for Moshe Rabbeinu that it's a milsa zuta to see? For him, it's not a big deal. So for him, for all Yidden, but for Moshe it works. So what does Alter Rebbe answer in Farbrengen Beis? No, because we all have it. We all have it naturally. However, then some of us have to work b'giyas abas and b'giyas nefesh. We have to get rid of the external things that we get ourselves involved in, our distractions, our world of external stimulation. You know, if we watch, videos, your eyes get blurry. Your mind can't think. If you're constantly on social media, your brain doesn't process anymore, opening up a safe and not learning anymore. It just doesn't work. Right, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it has to be mebayis ubachutz. You have to clear yourself out. It's yigiyas habas and yigiyas hanefesh. You have to first of all get rid of the basar, the flesh, the chitzonius, the chumrius. You have to work on yourself to get yourself into a place to get in tune with yourself again. So that's an avoid of birurim. But once you get there, it demands a self-confidence in yourself, a knowledge that this is true, and therefore you say, I'm going to fight the truth because it's the truth. I'm going to stand up to the Nisayan. It seems like Chas v'Sholem, October 7th made some people believe that David should give up on us, Chas v'Sholem. And others felt the other way. How do you have an opposite? How do you have two people coming with the same story two different ways? Comes from this Nakuda, right? Who stands by the Nisayan and who doesn't? Who does the Nisayan make versus who does the Nisayan break? So we're living in a generation, the Rebbe says in that Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe said it, but the Rebbe is highlighting it, and the Rebbe chazed the Maimer a few times, and Tavshin, they then made it into one big Maimer, Tavshin Melukid. The Kudus Hadvarim is that we're living in a generation that what demands from us is not so much getting involved with birurim, trying to refine ourselves. The Rebbe already told us, we dealt with that issue already, right? Everything has been refined. The world is perfect. The world is ready. Everything is there. So we're looking at these words of the Rebbe, and we're like, really? I still have a Yetzer Hara. I still enjoy my taivas. What does it mean everything is refined? How do you say that? The Rebbe Taka answers, and so the chlolus, everything is refined, but on each person on his personal level, okay, whatever, so there's still room for it. But the Rebbe says, kind of time, the whole avodas birun doesn't apply today. So what are we doing today? Kabbalah's playing Mashiach Sekena. What does that mean? The Rambam says, Kol mi she'eni mayim b'boy ve'eni mechakel b'yasa. You ask yourself a pashut shayla. Why does the Rambam use a lashon? Kol mi she'eni mayim b'boy ve'eni mechakel b'yasa. It's a strange thing. Okay, I have to be maimin. The Rambam gives us Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah, right? Which lohoyer ein kamekoymei. The Rambam's list of the 13 principles of faith and the Rambam's list of Ikrei Emunah and the Mishnah Torah is not the same. And l'chura, there's very big differences between the two. But to say that there's a chiv to believe that Mashiach is coming is understood. Okay. But what's the ein of chakel b'yaseh? What does it mean? It's not waiting for Mashiach. What is it? I have to wait for something that, like we said before, I've been waiting and he still hasn't come up. So at what point do I say that it's not going to happen? I have to be mechaka. Right? It's like when you were a child and your parents told you, we're going to go to the ice cream store today. So you're waiting and waiting. Comes the end of the day, your parents, it's too late, we can't go today. That's it. You tell me tomorrow after Mechaka, you have to wait for again? What is Pshat? So what does mean Mechaka? Mechaka means, the Friedrich Rebbe talks about in a Maimer Tofresh Peites. The word Chikaloi, the word to be mechaka is like by Yaakov Avinu it says, but Oviv Shomer es Hadover. By Yaakov Avinu, when Yosef came to his brothers and told his father the story of the dreams he had, it says, Yaakov was Shomer es Hadover, Hitmin Vitzofa, he was waiting. He was waiting and anticipating for this because he knew it was going to happen. You ever learned a sugya, you learned something, and it wasn't, you understood it, but you realized that there's something more to it. The sugya, Keitzach Abisal Tiffer, it goes deeper. You know it's deeper. You just didn't get to that depth yet. But it's something you could see me'elov. It's something you see by yourself that it should go deeper. Kol mi she'eni maimin ba is one darga. Kol mi she'eni mechakala, you're pasha denying the truth. You're pasha not living in reality, says the Rambam. Mechakala means you should see the world that this is pasha the reality of Mashiach. That's what he's saying. If you don't live in that world, that means your whole idea, your whole premise of Mashiach is wrong. Mashiach is not this thing that's coming as a schar. It's built into the nature of the world. It has to be. But this has to happen. If you're not machakalei, it's not just a chesed in your emunah, it's a chesed in how you understand the world. The kafir, leidak, benavim, whatever. So what's the Nakuda? The Nakuda is a person could ask the question, right? Is it happening? Is it not going to happen? We're living in a world today, maybe not, maybe yes. Maybe it's time to give up. That's Nisayin. That's the generation we're living now. Says the Rebbe, that's what we're left with today. What we're left with today is Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu, and it starts with us. As we said before, it's seeing the world in that way. That means we change our outlook. It's not about how much money I'm going to make. It's not about all the business deals I have to make. It's not, that's good also. Fine, we still have to live in this world. It's very interesting, Rabbeinu Bechaya. Rabbeinu Bechaya says in Parshas Veschanon, he asks the Shal in Parshas Veschanon, and says, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. You have to love the Eibishter. Fragt Rabbeinu Bechaya, why does the pasuk say V'ahavta? Why doesn't it say V'choshachta? You should have a lust for the Eibishter. Right? A deep chafetza, chasheka, the deep feeling of love to the Eibishter, like a lust. Says Rabbeinu Bechaya, this is all before all the psychology. He says, what's the difference between love, ava, and lust? He doesn't say it in English, so this is my translation of it. He says, when it's lust, you forget about yourself, but in a bad way. You don't take care of yourself. When a person is living in lust, it's a drug. It's something you just need. You forget about yourself. The Eibishter doesn't want that. The Eibishter wants you to love him, but he also wants you to take care of yourself. You have to eat. You have to sleep. You have to put food on the table. You have to do business. You have to do those things. Aber mitzad velcha kavana. What's your intention? Where are you going with it? Why? You ever ask yourself the question, why? Why am I here in this world? For what purpose am I here? You have to ask yourself this question. You have to ask yourself the question in the morning. Shulchan Aruch, it says, you wake up in the morning, it's gaber ka'ari lamed baboker. Why? Because shivisi Hashem l'negdi samid. It says the Alter Rebbe, and if you don't feel that way, yifashrish b'maisav, there's something wrong with you. What does that mean? Everybody wakes up in the morning with that feeling, that I have a purpose and a mission. Yifashrish b'maisav, the Alter Rebbe says. Don't get out of bed till yifashrish b'maisav. Figure your problem out. Because that should be natural to us. The chakalei should be just natural. But we're living in a world of Nisayin. So the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz of Tavshin Pei Daled really demands from ourselves to hold strong. And that's where, again, the Ma'amar B'Atat Tetzaveh, the Rebbe says that the koyach we have today in Ois Tes is that we could be in Golus and we know that's not what we want. We could have everything. We could have Mekol Tuv Mitzrayim, as we said. You could have everything you want. And from deswegen, this is not it. This is not the Gilut that I want. This is not the Eibishter. This is not Elikus. There's something more to life. There's something more real. It's not about who's going to win the sports game. I guarantee you, if they win or lose, it's not going to change you in any way. It may hurt a little bit if they lose. That's about it. If they win, oh, Baruch Hashem. You don't feel that, right? You get pride. You wave the flag for 5 seconds. Yay. Then next year comes along, you got to do it all over again. Same roller coaster mode. But it doesn't play a role on you. How does it impact your day to day? How does that have this? Right? So our mindset has to be, what's my purpose here? Why am I here in this world? And my purpose here is Lasis lo yizbarech dirav tachtainim. I have a very clear mission. The Alter Rebbe and Tanya sets out the purpose. He says, we're here for one reason. I need that the Eibishter created the world for one reason. And that is to make a dirav tachtainim. What does a dirav tachtainim mean? I see this world as the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek says that when he was a few weeks before the Petira, the Alter Rebbe pointed to the ceiling and asked him, what do you see? So he says, I see the beam. Says the Alter Rebbe, I see the Dvar Hashem that's Mechayeh the beam. Now I haven't seen this, but I think Pashut Pshat doesn't mean that the Alter Rebbe didn't see the beam. He saw the beam, but he saw the Dvar Hashem that's Mechayeh the beam. In other words, it wasn't a stira. Right? In other words, he saw the reality, the same reality. Mashiach does not means that all of a sudden we're going to wake up tomorrow and we're going back to the Stone Age. That's not what Mashiach means. Mashiach doesn't mean that somehow there's going to be, the genie out of the bottle, poof. That's not what it's going to be. It's going to be the Zalba Velt, the way we say, Olam kimin hagin heilig. Olam kimin hagin noig. It's going to be this world's going to be the same way. You're going to have the same cake and the same mashka. Everything is going to be the same. Nor then you're going to see the Dvar Hashem HaMachaya. For that you need a complaint to the Ma'arganim. The point being is that that's the perspective we have to have. Just like the Frierdiker Rebbe instilled and empowered his Chassidim to live in Mesiras Nefesh. You read the Sikha of Yutas Kislev Tov Reish Pei Zayin. It's like he almost like says, if you don't do this, you're a loser. If I can use those choices. If you don't be willing to die, I'll get it for Mesiras Nefesh. You push it, In years' time from now, they'll talk about you as a hero. And the Rebbe told us in Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe gave the Ma'ir Vatetzav and told us, we have Koyach Atzmi. We have to stand by the Nisayon. We have to be Makabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkeinu. We have to begin to see the world in this way. You can have your Achila V'Shtiya, right? The famous Gemara. Ein Bein, right? Is going to be Achila V'Shtiya V'Mayisa Mashiach, right? It's one of the tiniest why the Rambam holds that there's only going to be in Olam Atchiyah, there's not going to be Neshamas Begufim, there's not going to be physical bodies because he says, the Gemara says, there's not going to be food and the drink. So the Bein B'chai and the Ramban, they all have it, they don't like this Rambam. And the Rebbe, it satisfies it to saying that there's two Zmanim, there's two different stages. There's going to be a stage where everything's going to, right? But even then, we paskin like the Ramban, there's going to be Neshamas Begufim. That Olam Atchiyah is going to be Neshamas Begufim. Why? Because it's going to be the Neshama and the Zenis Ben Aguf, whatever it is. Right? But L'Peil Mamish, we're going to eat and drink. Right? It says, there's going to be a lot of money. We're not going to have to worry about the stock market. We're not going to have to worry about all these things. But we have to begin living this way. That's the mission. That's what we're doing. So in Mendel, when we wake up tomorrow morning, we ask ourselves, Yud Tes, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz. We sat by our Farbrengen. And what did it accomplish for me? Uvechein. Right? The Frierdiker Rebbe speaks in the Sichas how there's no point in the Farbrengen if there's no Vechein. What's the Vechein? What am I taking out of it? What's the Peil Yetza? If the Peil Yetza is, I checked it off my list, I was Mekayim, the Ross of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe to Farbrengen, Yud Beit Yud Gimel Tam is very nice. Yeshakayach, okay, it's a good Zach, not taking it away from you. Yesh Schar al Zeh. Right? But if you don't come out of it thinking, what do I need to do to make a Did of Tachteinim? How could I change my perspective? How could I think in terms differently? Starting with the fact that I have to empower myself to stand up against the Nisayim. People ask the question, are things going to change? Whether it's beside the community here or other. I don't see any change. Well, guess what? You still see the darkness. You'll see the darkness. If you want to live in that world and you want to see it as an olam you want to see the darkness, that's not going to live. You don't think there'll be change, it won't be change. It's up to you. Mashiach's not going to come poof. We have to remove the hester that's blocking us, that's making us think a certain way. Mashal mamish in a bissel way. It's another mashal of my shver. He says that when Rabashkin was freed, that's what I heard from him. I don't know the details, but officially he was told he was free. Zayis Chanukah, right? But in order for him to actually be free, to actually leave, he needed someone to pick him up. So here he's standing in prison, the same prison that he was in for 7 years, the same wardens, the same guards, the same fence, the same, and yet he's told he's free. Is he free? Is he not free? The Rebbe told us that we're free, that the goal is here. And we're like, no, I still see the Golos walls. I still see the same warden. I still see the same, right? Which one is it? Well, how do you think about it? How do you live your life? When we're Megala, our Mashiach, our Nakuda, our Primius, our Nitzutz HaMashiach, that's how the world is going to change. So again, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Tov Shin Pei Dalet is very different than Tov Reish Pei Zayin. We're not dealing with birurim anymore. It's not as chalta l'tshuva as chalta l'gula. We're already past that point. Now we're holding strong. We're not going to start believing in what the world tells us. And get caught up in all of the politics and all of the other things that make us think that that's where things are going. And when we have that resolution, when we have that takifus, when we have that koyach atzmi, when we truly believe in it, and again, we have sveikis. There's nothing wrong with a suffix. There's nothing wrong with a question, right? You know, you're always told as a child, "From a shaila start minish," right? The Gemara has a kasha, take on, and moves on. Not every question do you have to necessarily get an answer to. And not every question is there a point to get an answer to. Not every question is meant to be answered. Sometimes you're supposed to live with the question because the question demands adnosai. It's taka, not fear. If I think I need an answer, that means I'm still living in teva ne'olam hazeh. If I think I need everything to be figured out, al pi seichel, al pi das tachten in my world, then I'm not living in Gula anymore. We have to live with the question. We say it's not fear. It's not enough. That's what the Rebbe says. And you'll demand on Mosai. So Taka, how could October 7th happen? How could Taka be in all these goals for 2,000 years? Ask these questions. Don't become numb from the question. Have the question speak in a way that says, okay, therefore I'm demanding. And then it becomes real. And then we experience the Gilui of Melech HaMashiach. You should see it now. Take me up my Amish. The Frierdiker Rebbe gave us clear instructions as to what he sees the Yom Tif, the Ness of Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, what it should mean. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says that the point or the message, the Ness is all about Harbatzas HaTorah and Chizuk HaTorah. That our objective is to expand Torah, strengthen the learning of Torah, and that one has to take upon themselves, make hachlatas about making special times, making kviyas itim l'Torah, to learn Torah, to be kavei itim l'Torah, to learn Torah, nigel chassidus, etc. The Rebbe in the Sicha talks about the Lashonis that the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe uses it in the letter. The Rebbe there quotes on the bottom, he quotes the Rasag. The Rasag says, that our whole religion, right, last 200 years, there's a concept called nationality. It's a nayazach. Such a thing called nationality. In the 1850s started this idea called nationality, that people started feeling a certain affinity to their country, that they were raised and they were born, have a certain nationality. Today you have on your passport, which nationality are you? Yidden don't have a nationality. In other words, we don't live by a certain country, we don't even live by a certain language, we don't necessarily even live by a certain dress. You have many Yidden that live in different countries, that dress differently, speak different languages, etc. What's the one thing that holds us all together is the Torah. Pasha Kipshutei means that we all keep the same Torah. But what it means is that the Torah kihem chayenu v'irich yameinu. I remember my Zayda, Rabbi Gronel Shalom, used to come to New York once a year. So we used to go as kids. That's really the only time we got to see him. Although I came here when I was 3 years old, but otherwise, when else did I see him? So we would come. We would spend Shabbos in New York. So we would go eat there by Shabbos or whatever. So I remember once he was there. This was going back many years ago. And he says, "I pashut feel sick. I pashut haven't learned anything in 2 days." And I remember thinking to myself as a kid, I'm like, what does that mean? You pashut feel sick because you haven't learned anything in 2 days. And as I got older, I began to appreciate a lot what that means. The Gemara tells us in Bava Metzia that the Rava says there's dinim lagabi if you hire a worker and the worker the job that you hired him for is not necessary anymore. So the question is, could you just cancel the job, or you have to pay the worker, right? And the Seichus in the Gemara over there in Bamitzia has a whole arichas on this sugya. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch, in Shem Lamed Aleph, the whole sugya over there in Choshen Mishpat. So Gemara says that Rava was the Rav of the city of Mechasya. Find it elsewhere in the Gemara Psachim, where Rava says, so he says that the halacha that you could pay him bottle, like a worker who doesn't have to work, a worker who gets paid leave, whatever you want to call it, doesn't apply to the people of Machzah, of the place of Mechuzah. Why? Because of the fact that by them, if they didn't work, they pasha got sick. They pasha needed to work. You have people like that. Maybe we call them today workaholics. Everything today is a syndrome. Amol, people had, showed a certain sense of productivity that you pasha needed to work. So you have the same idea when it comes to limud Torah. You have certain people, not necessarily on the level of, that they're learning Torah, Yom V'Layla together, that we will say that's their umnus. Nowadays we don't say that. But the idea of learning, that learning should be ingrained and part of your culture, part of your day-to-day, is something that should be something that's self-understood. And we have Takechitas Anambam. Some people tie it. The reason why we have it is to make sure we learn at least something. But and I have this idea. Amol Kechsidim. The more they learned, the more bottled they became. So they used to pride themselves that they're not like the Misnagdim, because a Misnagid, the more he learns, the more yeshus he gets. By a chassid, the more he learns, the more bittul he becomes. Heintiketeg, unsere yeshus as melernisht. That's our whole ego today. So we don't learn. I don't learn Gemara. I don't learn Daf Yomi. I don't learn. I'm not a Misnagid. The importance of sitting and learning to be inculcated with such a culture. This is who we are. It's impossible, as a famous mashal, the Gemara says, right, of Papus Rabbi Kiva, that you take the fish out of the water, the fish die. The Frierdiker Rebbe was Moser Nefesh to establish chadarim, to establish yeshivas, to establish people to learn, even one-on-one. We, Baruch Hashem, today don't have any of those issues. No one is forcing us not to learn. There's only one thing that's forcing us not to learn. Right, as the Gemara says in Brachas, that Bemis we're right the last is to the tzeincha. Right, we want to do Yiratzin, and what's the ikov? It's the Isa, the Soyer Sheba Isa. Right, we have all the distractions that are in the world, whether it's the cell phone, the social media. I don't know how much of the older age relates to this, but the younger age, maybe, I don't know if the people here relate to this, but this is an issue today. The social media, the world of technology, is a lot to do with the Soyer Sheba Isa today. So instead of learning, and ain't a daim if you listen to a shir on the phone or on a shir versus when you sit and learn yourself. Besides the fact that halachically you're supposed to say the words, right? Hira lav kedibur, halacha lemaisa. There's an afkamina. Do you make a birchas hatayra? Do you make a bracha before you learn? If you just are thinking the words, is that considered like you learned, right? In Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchas birchas hatayra, this is a shaila. Is hira kedibur dummy or not? Ksiva kedibur, whatever. The point is that you're not really yotze your mitzvah of limud Torah by just hearing from a shir. You have to be saying the words. You have to be sitting with a sefer and saying the words. You have some people talk that even when they learn b'chavrusa with someone, they say the words together. It's a little annoying sometimes, but right, there's such a thing. In other words, the perspective has to be that I can't go a day without sitting and learning. Sitting and learning doesn't necessarily have to mean for some. It could be kaveis itim, could be at least, Perek Echad Shachris, Perek Echad Arvis, right? Gemara Menachos at the end says, And Zborn Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe brings it in Hilchos Talmud Torah, that for some people, taka, that they can't do more. Versus someone that could learn and doesn't learn, that doesn't work. The Alter Rebbe says someone who could learn and doesn't learn is not allowed to go into business. His job is to sit and learn the whole day. You have those people that they're cut out for business. So those people that's supposed to be for business, so for them they have the exception. They have the ptur of Perek Echad Shachris, Perek Echad Arvis. They learn something in the morning, they learn something at night, and the Gemara says even Kriya Shema does it, right? Kriya Shema is considered limud Torah. But everybody else, or not everybody else, anyone who could sit and learn, that Alter Rebbe paskins, the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, if you could learn, you have no right to go to business. You have to sit and learn the whole day. I had a chavrusa a number of years ago that we covered probably 3/4 of Shas over a couple of years together, and he's a big businessman. So Baruch Hashem, he's made himself wealthy. I said, the question was whether you're allowed to be in business. He has such a good head. He needs to be sitting and learning the whole day. He says, yeah. Once I make enough money, right? That's what they all say. Once I make enough money, there's never enough. But whatever, maybe by some there is. But for some people, if you could be sitting and learning, you have to be sitting and learning. And even if you can't, you have to be kivei sitim. There has to be a day. There can't be a day. And I don't just mean chidas anamba. One of the ideas I would like to Pashut simple the limit halachas. Pashut go through the basics of what does it mean to be whether it's Hilchos Yeredeya, getting a smicha program running where people are Pashut knowing the basics of what you need to know. If you didn't get smicha till now, you could always get it. They have in Crown Heights, they have a program, L'man Yilmadu, L'man Yishmu, whatever it is, that Pashut has a smicha program for any age. You could sit and learn Hilchos Shabbos, Hilchos Bas B'chol, Hilchos Taruvos. To have a shir in basic halachas hatzlichas, yemu yamayim, the basic areas of halacha. Sometimes it comes to a very simple shaila that people think, sometimes you don't even think, you don't even realize. Let's say something spills on a table on Shabbos, you take a napkin. A napkin may not be such a problem, but you run into shilas on a day-to-day basis of questions that you should know. It shouldn't be that you should feel shigas talmud leiluzadin. You can't excuse yourself that I don't know. You have a responsibility to sit and learn. You have a responsibility to sit and learn, and if you want to learn, bother someone else to learn with you. Demand it from the other person. He has a eschayvus. He has a responsibility. That's what the Yidden did in the whole giving of the Torah was premised on this idea of Kol Yisrael Arevim, that we're going to make sure everybody else is going to do as well. So no one could say, I'm not interested in learning. A bacher in yeshiva, you have a question. If there's a weaker bacher, should you sit and learn with the weaker bacher, or you should learn yourself? So there maybe I would say that maybe your job right at that moment is more to learn as much as you could. So obviously you should help out the weaker bacher. But at the same time, I think the ikar is that you have to learn as much as you could. When you're in yeshiva, your job is to learn as much as you could. But when you're older, you don't have that much time, or you're making shiurim, and someone asks you to learn with them, you have his chayvus to sit and learn with them. You have an obligation to help them out. But the approach has to be that I'm sitting and learning. There's not a day that I don't sit and learn. And whether it's simple, learning a Sifin Shulchan Aruch, or Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You find by the Rebbe, in the early years, the Rebbe held very highly of the Chassidim. The early years, the Rebbe demanded that was ein Baki from Bereishis ad Shagas Aryeh, that we should know everything. In the later years, the Rebbe says, Al Kapanim Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe gave up on us a little bit. But Halavai Taka, we learn Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Go through Kitzur Shulchan Aruch a few times. Professor Wakov Shalom, right? The Rebbe told him to learn Kitzur 3 times. He finished it once, and then the Rebbe told him to learn it again, and then learn it a 3rd time. It's a good thing to learn Kitzur Shulchan Aruch also. But this idea, again, the basic of Kiveis Itim L'Torah, and again, Chumash Chidas and Rambam is not included. It's Limud HaTorah. But that's not the Chiyuv. It's the chiyuv because you have his kashrus. But the chiyuv of limud HaTorah means if you could learn more, you have to learn more. If you're a businessman, you don't have the whole day to learn, so you don't learn the whole day. So you learn the face an hour. You make sure you learn. If you make the effort, take a chavrus and sit and learn. I said, don't be yaitzu with a shir. That's a nice thing. That's a good thing. You can do that when you're doing things. You can listen to a shir also. But take a chavrus and sit and learn. Make a time. Make an effort. And if you're that serious and you want to have a chabura. You want people to come together and make it happen. Don't wait for someone to come and make something happen. Right? We all sit around. Right? What's the expression that a watched pot never doesn't boil? Right? Because everybody's waiting. The Gemara into this, it's very interesting actually. I think it's the Sifran who says, he asks a question by Yosef and his brothers. So it said that Reuven comes and Reuven sees that he's in the pit, right? But there was snakes and scorpions in the pit. So Reuven tells his brothers, don't kill him, sell him to the Midianim, whatever it was. So I think the Sifran asks the question. He says, didn't they realize that nothing was happening to him? Yosef was whole, right? Why did they throw him into the pit is another question. That the Chaim asks the question. The Torah, what was their cheshbon? First they planned on killing Yosef, and then they changed their mind. So instead they threw him into the lion's den. What's the difference? So the Chaim says that because animals don't have b'chira chavshus, so therefore, if he was taka chayv, they were like testing him. They were testing to see. They felt that Yosef was a made of malchus, he deserved to be put to death. So they therefore didn't want to do it b'yadayim. They didn't want to kill him directly. So they did. They threw him to the dogs. They threw him to the snakes and scorpions. Hamashasa kelav achachavede is a gram bin zakin or whatever, not whatever. You can chayv only misa b'dei shemayim, whatever it is. So. So the Chaim says that that was their kavanah. It's interesting, by the way, because the implication of the Rachaim is that the brothers felt, the way that Rachaim learns, this is just the Maimon Amuzgi, the Rachaim learns that the brothers felt that if they would kill him, it may not be right. But it could be they were killing him based on, in other words, it wasn't necessarily something that was being al-pidin. They had to see if the animals, this is machlekes between the Alter Rebbe and the Rachaim about this particular prat, another sicha there, but in common koime. Anyways, going back to Sifran, so the Sifran says they saw that the snakes and scorpions weren't killing him. So why didn't they just take him out? Why didn't they just take him out? They realized that their test was up, right? So he says everybody was waiting for the next guy. You know, you have 10 brothers sitting around. Yeah, they ain't invited. Okay, when are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? When you wait and wait and wait, nothing gets done. The thing dies. You can't wait for everybody else. You can't wait and someone's going to come, you know, and make me inspired. Someone's going to take the initiative and make something happen. This is the man's, you know, as the Rebbe said right in the beginning of Tafshin Yud Aleph, he says, I'm taking the job, but I'm not taking the job to make it easier for you. The Rebbe says, well, we didn't know the Rebbe really meant he's going to make it harder for us, but meaning he demands so much from us. But the Rebbe says, you're gonna still work, right? You're gonna have to do the work. That demands from us to say, there's a change has to be made. If I'm not learning, I have to learn. I can't wake up one day and not have a plan to learn. It shouldn't be Eilal Adas. It shouldn't be Eilal Adas. Unless you're Isaac B'tzarchit Tzibur, you have exceptions, you know. I was Farbrengen a number of years ago, Sukkos, and I was complaining that that's man because I was, you know, busy with yeshiva, whatever. I said I pushed it. I can't have a time to learn Rambam. So there was other people, other chanchim over there. They says chiyasani, you know, like we're not the only ones that feel that way, right? There's some taka, you know, you don't have time. There's pashut, you know, you're busy with other things, other good, important things. Your job may not be to sit and learn the whole day. Your job is to help other people. But other than that, you still have to make time. You have to make time to sit and learn. And the most important factor about sitting and learning is that it changes you. Right? The famous shaila, do you accept the Talmud Sheni Hogun? Do you take a student, right, that doesn't actually, the Gemara learns out, we mentioned the Gemara in Chulin, right, about the Kohanim would start their Avodah at 12 or 13, and the Leviim would start at 30, but they had 5 years of learning. So the Gemara says, what was the 5 years? To see if there were a Talmud that was ready to learn. If he wasn't ready to learn, you gave up on him. And the famous story, right, about the locking the doors and brachas of the Beis Medrash, at the end of the day, what is Alter Rebbe paskin? What are we paskin? That even if he's a Talmud Sheni Algun, even if he's not capable of learning Hamor Shabbat, just sitting and learning itself, giving him the tools to learn and starting to learn will change a person. So if we have questions or we have struggles and we see the world in darkness and we gotta open the light. The Eir HaGonos is in the Torah. We have to open up the lights. We have to be able to feel. Sometimes we feel paralyzed. It's like the child in the room. The parents put the child to sleep and they close the lights, and the child all of a sudden sees monsters in the corners. All of a sudden everything is, the shadows, and everything becomes a monster. So he's terrified and he screams, Tati, and you run into the room and you flick on the light, all the monsters go away, But the pella is not that the father came in and flicked on the light. The pella is that the light switch was mamish right next to the child's bed. All he has to do is go like this. But he's frozen in his anxiety, in his fright. He could all just flip on the switch. Right? It's a very simple thing. Open up the book and you'll see. Try it, you like it. Tamaru ki teiv Hashem. That's why the Lashon HaPasuk is Tamuru. Doesn't say, right? It says Tamu, you have to taste it. Taste it means something that you have to physical taste, or also, intellectually you have to delve into it, and then you'll see what it's really all about. So the Peil Mamish, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, one of the things that is very clear, we don't have to speak more about this, it's very clear that the Friedrich Rebbe told us, and the Rebbe told us, our job is to make sure that we're sitting and learning Torah. And if you don't have a kviyas yet, if you don't have a chavrusa yet, your job is to make it happen. I'm not available, but anybody else could be available. Chas v'shalom. The point is that really this is a schayvus on every single one of us, and even if we are learning, to be meisuf and limud Torah, to add an additional amount of learning. You learn for an hour, you learn for 2 hours, you add a little bit more. That's our job to do. And it doesn't have to be. The Gemara Taka says in Eiruvin, b'makom asher libi chafetz. If you don't enjoy learning Gemara, you like learning Shulchan Aruch, you don't like Shulchan Aruch, you like Chassidus. I sometimes had Talmidim would say, I'm a Baal Chassidus, I'm not a Baal Nigla. That's an excuse for someone who feels inferior in learning opening a Gemara. If you have a struggle with it, get the right help, get the skills, right? Don't blame it on something else. Don't find excuses. Point is that we have all this chayvus, a responsibility to make sure that we're sitting and learning and putting in the time, and it'll change us. It'll make us. The life will be different. Instead of spending time maybe watching the sports and everything else, you spend an extra 5-10 minutes learning something. It'll gradually make an impact, and that will change the whole perspective on life changes. L'chaim, l'chaim. One of the inyanim that the Rebbe talks about in the Maimarim on Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, so we spoke about the inyanim of Nesyanis and the idea of koyach atzmi. The Rebbe says there's two inyanim: there's koyach atzmi and there's bitul atzmi. What's the difference between koyach atzmi and bitul atzmi? Koyach atzmi means, on the one hand, one has to stand strong. As we said before, either the nisayin could make you, meaning if you defeat it, or it breaks you. So koyach atzmi means where a person stands strong to the nisayin. Halt sich stark. He doesn't give in. But mitzad sheni, there also has to be a bitul atzmi. What's pshat a bitul atzmi? A bitul atzmi means that there's a certain acceptance of the reality. That means that sometimes, just a mashal ba'alma, you have a situation of where a person is Achman al-Tzlan not well, and it's difficult for the person. So if the person is going to constantly deny or fight the reality, it's going to make life more difficult for the person, right? If a person is living in denial, if a person is not willing to be makir, not willing to recognize the reality, so then it makes life more difficult. So the person has to first be makir, recognize the truth, and say, this is the reality, this is the truth. Be makabel it. Not that you give into it, but you makabel it. And then, once you at least recognize it, you know what it is, so then you could start working on it. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, when you have someone that comes to you by davening, and he's bothering you, right? He's not letting you daven, he's disturbing you. So how are you supposed to react in that situation? So the Alter Rebbe says that your person has to realize that it's a siman milamayla, that this is a nisayon, a test for the person to see, how strong is he holding by his davening. Which is again the same nikud about that this person shouldn't break you. On the contrary, he comes stronger by it. But there's an element that needs to be there, l'chatchila, which is being makir and recognize that you're not fighting with the person, you're not fighting with the situation. You're in makabel. Okay, so you have a person that's coming and is bothering you. The person is not letting you daven. Ein chanami. Now, what you need to do on your end, you have the bittul atzmi, you're makabel that reality, and at the same time, then you have a koyach atzmi, which is a certain takivas that say, I'm not going to give in. Hine lo yichrev lo yishtachava. I'm going to stay with the same starkheit, and I'm not going to give in. And the Rebbe says that what's the maila, or what is accomplished through that? What it does is it brings the person to a higher darga. It makes the person reach a much higher level. The fact that you're able to overcome the nisayon means that now you come to a higher level. That means by birurim, as we're going back, when you're refining yourself through birurim, you're not necessarily elevating yourself, you're refining yourself. You're working on certain things. A nisayon takes you to a different place. So derech mashal, again, let's say in a relationship, or even with a chavershaft, you get into a negative situation, right? There's a certain a moment of contention, a certain moment of frustration, a moment of where you're both not seeing eye to eye. So you could have a moment of where you sort of, you give up, and you say, okay, so this is not for me. Or the person could say that no, on the contrary, this is itself is going to take me and make my relationship even stronger. The fact that now I have this particular nisayon in the relationship, it's actually going to take me stronger. The Rambam says that Adam loimed reiv chachmasei el baleilis, that the person learns reiv chachmasei baleilis. So you do that. There's a shaila on the Rambam. How is it supposed to work? That you're supposed to sleep. Also, the Rambam says somehow you're supposed to sleep and supposed to learn at night. It's a little bit of a problem. My father used to say that his zayda, meaning my elder zayda, used to say, as me will durchgehen shas in ein Nacht and in dem Nacht reichet schlafen. Right? You want to get the best of both worlds. Learn the ganze shas in one night and also be able to sleep. Whatever, people already asked the question, but there's the why does the Rambam say that Adam loimed reiv chachmasi baleilis? It's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Gemara in Eruvin, the Gemara says that loy ibra laila el legirsa, that the night was made legirsa. What? Later sira legirsa. That the night was made to legirsa. So why is the Rambam changing it and saying that a person's loimed reiv chachmasi baleilis? Girsa is not something. Girsa means l'chora. It's you're going through it smooth. Girsa means you're just learning, reading, right? Chachma is a different thing. In fact, the Gemara in Eruvin also elsewhere says that a person should learn. He should learn Gemara. I mean, he should learn everything from one Rebbe. One teacher should teach him everything, and when it comes to Chachma, he should learn Chachma from many different Rebbes. Because there's a very big difference between Girsa, learning. Right? The Gemara tells us that a Meir came to first Rabbi Akiva, and a Meir was a lavler, he was a scribe, he was a sefer, and he came to learn, but he couldn't handle Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva sent him off to Rabbi Shmuel to first learn everything, no Torah, and then he could come to me. Rabbi Akiva was the kul naliba to Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, right? Everything. Rabbi Akiva was the mastermind. He was the seichel behind everything. So why does the Rambam say that a person is learning reiv chachmasei baleilis, which seems to be different than lagirsa? I don't know if anybody else discusses it. I'm sure it's discussed, but a word on them to say is that what's the pshat? What's pshat leila? What's the pshat night? Said before about Laila, who knows the shnasam? What's pshat Laila? Laila means a state of confusion. Darkness, choshech, means that it's not clear. It's not oid, it's not lichtik, it's not clear. You don't know where you're going, you don't know what's happening. But sometimes there's a choshech that's thick, right? Like by makas choshech, there's a thickness that it puts you in a position where you feel frozen. The choshech is so strong that you should feel lost, you feel empty, you feel hopeless, you feel like you're ready to give up. Says the Rambam, it's not Pashut Pshat, the Rambam Says the Rambam, Adam loimed reiv chachmasei baleilis. In that situation of Laila, when a person is in a position where he feels like everything is crashing in on him, where mamish is felt everything is he can't get out of it. So then a person actually, that's when he learns the most. That's when he gains the most chachma. Ein chacham kibal anisoyin. Right? An emes chacham is someone that has the experience and the knowledge and to be able to work through the situations. Memela, the nisayin says the Rebbe is not something that's supposed to affect a change in the thing that you're trying to deal with, because that thing we said doesn't. That's the lashon over there. The mime is that doesn't have any real mitzias, whatever. But it's supposed to make the person stronger. It's supposed to make the person on a greater level. Memela, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz was speaking about is a time where, as we mentioned earlier, is be'ikar in our generation we're dealing with the nisyanis. So on the one hand, it's taka. We have to fight against it. On the other hand, we have to have the bittul atzmi. We also have to recognize the reality. That is, we can't deny the reality. The reality is that it is dark. The reality is that we're not. There isn't the level of Gilui Elokus the way it's supposed to be. And the point here is not to deny anything. The point is not to run away and deny. The point is to truly accept that this is the Metzias, and stand up to it and say, it's not going to drown me. It's going to teach me. It's not just going to teach me, it's going to make me grow. So it means Peil Mamish, practically speaking, whether it's nisyanis on the level within the mind of sveikus and all that, but talking about practically, we spoke about limud hatayra, we spoke about needing to make shiurim. One of the nisyanis is, you come home from a hard day of work and you don't want to. It's pashut, you're exhausted. You want to go to sleep, or you want to rest. You don't want to get involved in limud hatayra. Or it's in the morning, you have to go to the minyan or whatever. So that's in the sayyid. What are you going to do at that moment? What are you going to do? Are you going to give in? So you're going to go to sleep? You're not going to, I had someone once ask me, he said that he comes home very tired. He says it happens sometimes that he goes to bed, he's in his pajamas, and then he remembers that he didn't daven ma'ariv yet. He says, does the Eibusher really want me to get out of bed and daven ma'ariv? The Eibusher understands. I had a hard day. The Eibusher does really? The Eibusher want me to get out of bed? So I told him, I said, let's say your wife asked you to come home at a certain time, right? Your wife said you have to come at 10 o'clock. And you came home 11 o'clock. And you give her the best excuse in the world. You don't understand, it was a geschmack of Farbrengen, this, that, and the other thing. She'll understand. She'll understand it. Doesn't mean you didn't make a pgam in the relationship. Doesn't mean she won't hold it against you. Doesn't mean it won't be something that shows distrust. Right? What I'm saying is that a person has to recognize that it's an assignment, it's a challenge. This is a way of testing us, right? Hashem tzadik yivchan, the pasuk says. The Eibusher tests only those. The Medrash says, what does it mean? Hashem tzadik yivchan. The Medrash says that there's a person who makes pots, clay pots. So in order to know if the pot is a strong pot, you take a hammer and you bang it, right? If it doesn't shatter, you know it's a strong pot. Says the Medrash, a person who's a potter, someone who's making pots, and it comes and he sees that one of the pots is taka, he already sees it's weak, he's not going to take the hammer and smash it because he knows it's not going to survive the hammer blow, right? Hashem Tzadik Yivchan, the Eibush only gives nisyanis to us, to people that can handle it. So we have to recognize that taka, you're going to come to a situation where it's going to be difficult to keep the shear that you committed to, or that it's going to come situations, the Achdus is always easy at first, right? The Rebbe Rashab in Samachov talks about the fact how you have first, what should come first, the hachna or the Achdus? Which one is more important? To first have the hachna, the breaking, or first the Achdus? The Achdus is always easy. Right? It gets exciting. Okay, I'm making a resolution, a hachlata, I'm going to start learning. Right? And then it comes the hard part. L'peil mamish, doing it. When it comes to l'peil mamish, so maybe the first few days it's exciting, the first few days it's maybe even easy because you're running off adrenaline, you're running off the excitement of the inspiration. Then there's going to come a point where it's going to kick in, it's going to move from netzach to hoid. Netzach is the excitement. Hoid is where it becomes, where it's you have to be devoted to it, you have to be committed to it. Right? It's like in marriage. The man is always more living in the netzach side. He gets excited and then he wants to run away. And the woman is the one that's the malchus, right? The Zohar malchus that keeps it all together, right? So you have the being committed to the thing. So how do you stay committed to it? It's going to be in the Soyim. When you have this bittul atzmi, recognizing from the beginning with that it's going to not always going to be easy. Some people give up because they wanted to make a shir, they wanted to have kviyas itim. They said, yeah, they made a achlata, we're going to start learning b'chavrusa, we're going to start learning. But what happens is, they don't realize that l'payel mamish, it's going to come the time that's going to be in the side. Yeah, we're going to daven in the morning with a minyan. There's going to be a time it's going to be challenging. That has to be l'chatchila understood, that's part of it. That means you go into the bittul atzmi recognizing the realities. You're not turning, you're not becoming all of a sudden, overnight becoming, able to overcome all the challenges. So in l'chatchila go with that bittul atzmi. That gives you the power of the teikef atzmi. That gives you the power that when that challenge comes up, and it's not easy. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to go to the shir. You don't want to learn with your chavrusa. It's easier not to. Or if it's, let's say, on the phone, you're busy on the phone and you shouldn't. You're wasting time on social media, whatever it is. Or many examples today is, we've mentioned the technology, whatever it is, and you shouldn't. So the moment that you recognize that this is takad in a soyin, you stand up to it and say, it's not going to break me, I'm going to break it. When you have that mindset, you get the better of it, and it doesn't get the better of you. That means you have to empower yourself. You have to be able to believe in yourself. You have to be able to know that it's going to be challenging. There's going to be times it's going to be very difficult. It's not always going to be easy, right? It's sort of like you program yourself to recognize this. That's not always going to be easy. Have people that they weren't keeping Shabbos for a long time, and finally get inspired to keep Shabbos. So if you haven't been keeping Shabbos for 3-4 years, all of a sudden start keeping Shabbos is not easy, right? Besides the fact that you got used to doing certain things, now it's not very easy, and so it's very shver. So they try to keep one Shabbos, and then they're ready next Shabbos, and then they fall, and they machal Shabbos. So they feel a little broken and guilty and all that, and then they give up. Why? Because you see, I can't. No, l'chatchila, right? I tell them you're gonna mess up one Shabbos. That's part of it, right? That's the way it's gonna go. There's gonna be a time that you're gonna mess up. That's part of the program right now. When a child is learning how to walk or even to stand, they get up and they fall down. Now, if we would have to learn how to walk when we're 13 years old, we would never learn how to walk. Especially today with the cell phone, forget about it. But even Amol, we wouldn't learn how to walk if we had to. If the mind was going to tell us you fall, I had to relearn how to walk. I was in a severe accident. It takes a lot of willpower to relearn how to walk. The seichel says you're a failure. You don't want to do it. You tried and didn't work. So I tell these bochai, I say, okay, it's gonna happen this way. It's normal, right? You're not supposed to be perfect on day one. It's not supposed to happen instantly. It's a gradual process. It takes time. But this is all part of the Nisayin. This is all part of the Nisayin. Is the recognition, is the understanding that that's the way the process works. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen with the motivation at first. It's necessary, but it doesn't. No motivation lasts. The motivation never stays. Every motivation eventually leaves, right? But what sticks with you is the original kavanah. Why you're doing it. The enthusiasm may go away, but the kavanah remains. And that kavanah, if you're prepared properly, enables you to pass through the nisyanis. So all the achlatas that Be'ez Hashem we've all made tonight, and any continued achlatas that we make to progress in our Yiddishkeit, in our hafatzas haTorah, in our chizuk haTorah, chizuk hayadus, Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the mindset has to be, it's a process. It's not that tomorrow all of a sudden I'm going to wake up, I'm going to be a different person. And that's not what the Eibusher wants, right? Yetzirah yesh lachem. What did Moshe Rabbeinu tell the malachim? The malachim tayin etznu chayit chal hashemayim, keep the Torah by us. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, yetzirah yesh lachem. You have a yetzirah, you have a challenge, you have a struggle? No. The Torah is not meant for you. The Torah was meant for people who have a struggle. Ad Kedei Kach, the Rebbe discusses in a Sicha, a very pashtush that he should, everybody should ask. The Rebbe discusses in the Sicha whether there's a mitzvah of chinuch min ha-Torah. So Narichas and Rishonim Achrein about this discussion whether there's a mitzvah of chinuch min ha-Torah. So we bepashtas paskin that chinuch is the Rabbanon, right? Except for when it comes to Talmud Torah or whatever, maybe there's a discussion about that. Shabbos, okay, right? Whether that's beget the chinuch or not, yeah, Shemem Gimel. But when it comes to, so the Rebbe here asks a pashto shal. The Rebbe says l'chura mitzvah chinuch is muchrach to be min ha-Torah. It has to be min ha-Torah, because otherwise, how does the Rebbe should expect you to all of a sudden at 13 years old, boom, all of a sudden? Right? You didn't have a might of your whole life. All of a sudden, 13 years old, you're going to start having might of every night with Kriyash Mashalamita. I mean, come on. Right? As we said before about the Sheda, it's just not going to happen overnight. So the Rebbe in the Havamin, at least in the Sicha, says that it has to be Al Pi Seichel, that Chinuch is min ha-Torah. The Rebbe then goes back on it. The Rebbe doesn't leave with that. But that Havana, that Inyan, the Rebbe does say, to expect all of a sudden a 13-year-old to all of a sudden change overnight to become a Shemer Torah mitzvahs and care about Torah and all that. No, it takes time. And therefore we have to realize that in everything we're going to do, it's a process. Whether it's personal change, community change, Welt change, all of these things doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and there's always going to be setbacks. Thank you. It's going to be setbacks, relapses. Now, Tereb and Tani, the Geras HaKodesh talks about the shmanim that's in the yayin, right? That you have the wine and it settles all the shmanim to the bottom. So you don't want to shake the barrel, because if you shake the barrel, so then the sediment is going to come back up. Right, so sometimes we're afraid that we're shaking the barrel, we're gonna fall again. Sometimes we have to feel safe to know you could shake the barrel, you could and it'll be okay. That's part of the process. That's also important, and especially the ikar part, the ikar point, the ikar nekuda is that we have to realize that who's empowering us, with whose koyches are we really doing this. Because every yid has an etzem haneshama, the koyach atzmi that comes from all of us. Who's giving us that koyach atzmi or who's megalos that koyach atzmi? Koyach atzmi is ours. Who's megal that koyach atzmi is the Rebbe's. And that Maimer Vat Tetzaveh, that Rebbe says clearly, I got you to the point that you recognize you have a koyach atzmi. Now you got to do the rest. That's what the Rebbe says in the Maimer. Right? The Rebbe says, I'm leaving you. Gimel Tammuz is happening because you have now everything you need. I took you to the point of etzem that you know you have a koyach atzmi. Shluchim are going all over the world. Right? My brother-in-law is going to the northernmost point in the world, in the Farbrengen, Alaska. That's 41 degrees below zero during the winter. Where is that coming from? Right? That's not seichel, Even if you enjoy the Alaska, but that's during the summertime, not during the winter. Right, that type of perspective is that shows what the Rebbe instilled in us, what the Rebbe gave us, that gilui ha'etzem, that hamshachas ha'atzmus, that this is, we could do it and we should do it and we expect it from ourselves, So we have to realize that this is something that is part of us. This is there by us, and now we just got to nurture it. Right? Like watering the plant. We got to make that seed come out and flower and blossom and become what we're supposed to become. And again, the ikar nekuda here is that we have to have the mindset of the Tachtainim that brings about the ultimate, the change of the whole world, that it's going to be in a way of Beroko Basa Yachtov Kepi Avai Diver Meher V'Meina Mamash L'Chaim. A certain path in life. So Taka we have Bechira, and we have Bechira Be'ikar, right? The Gemara says Hakol B'dei Shemaim Chutz Me'yir Shemaim. We have Bechira primarily or only, not primarily, on only when it comes to Torah mitzvahs, to whether we do Torah mitzvahs. So our Bechira is dependent, our Torah mitzvahs is really our choice, and deeper yet is the way it's explained in Chassidus. The Rebbe talks about this, that we were Yivchar Lonus Nach L'Seinu, we were Beicher, we made this choice. You have a discussion. I've had this discussion with the different people. Taina, the Eibush is Tzakor Chachatachai. The Eibush put me into this world. He forced me into it, and now he wants me to live by his standards. I didn't want to be here, and that's it, right? Ashdus Mishaloi Noila, right? The Gemara in Erevin. It's better not to be born, right? The Chrayis is too great. But that's not the way we look at it, because the Pshat is, I think actually the Gros says this word. The Mishnah says, al korchach chai. So mitzad echad, the person has a taina, but then it says al korchach meis. Once you're in the world, you don't want to leave. So in that sense, we all make the bechira. But in Chassidus it says that we made the bechira when our neshama was still a chiluk alakam. Well, it's not still. It's always a chiluk alakam. The darg of the neshama that's a chiluk alakam mal mamish, and the darg of the neshama that's higher than yichida. We chose. We made this decision. So when we're talking about Yira and Kabbalah's oil, it's not a Yira Kabbalah's oil, something that's against our Ratzon or something against us. It's really something that we chose to be. But then as the neshama comes into the guf, so when the neshama comes into the guf, it loses that awareness. It becomes involved in the guf's awareness and the seichel of the guf, or the awareness of Gashmius. And in that place, it seems like it's a Kabbalah's oil. Kabbalah's oil means that it's not natural to you, or not something that you feel that you want to do. But the beginning of that blade, it has to be sur made up. Which means that there has to be the awareness that there's yesh balabais l'birasu, that there's responsibility what I do. I can't just, life is good. What do they say here in Australia? No worries, mate, right? Like
she'll be right.
Who to what?
She'll be right. Do good now.
I don't know. I don't know this. Lapail, we live in a world that perhaps we think what we want to do, we don't want to do. No, that's the first step. So what is the basic level of the sur meirat that we're talking about? So the Alter Rebbe already establishes it in Tanya, and in Kundas Hamayim, the Rebbe Rashab talks about Abarichas, that we have the power to control our machshava dibur ma'isa. That we have a responsibility to think before we talk, but more importantly, to think before we think. We have to be careful in what we think. Right in the beginning of Likutei Devarim, the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe talks about over there machshava mayelas, the power of machshava, to have a reina machshava, to have a pure thought, a pure state of thought. To find people today that have a pure state of thought is probably a novelty. That we're maybe I shouldn't speak. I'm just saying, like, to not have been influenced, to not have any gam or an improper image, or even, I'm not talking about aroyas, I'm talking about even just like the imagery that we live in the world. You walk on the street, whatever it is, that our minds, our machshavas is not pure, and it takes work, it takes effort. We have to rely on the Lefnei Hashem to purify ourselves, to purify our machshava. But the beginning of the Sur Meirah is we have to be careful on the very basic level of machshava. So again, this is all a process. So Alter Rebbe talks about in Tanya the power of a skafia. What does a skafia mean? Skafia doesn't mean that from now on I'm never going to do anything again. That's not what a skafia means. Skafia means is that right now, this moment, I'm gonna hold back. That's what a skafia means. A skafia is impulse control. Your impulse is to eat the cake. You're on a diet, you don't eat the cake. That's at that moment you have impulse control. That's what a skafia is. At that moment, to make it, and we can all live on that level for the moment. You don't have to be a beinoni every second. You have to be you don't have to. You could be a beinoni for a moment, as the Rebbe says, right? You could be in that state, and that's the pasha the sur meirah nachshava. The pasha thing is a thought comes into your mind. As soon as you become aware of it, not always you become aware of it right away, but as soon as you become aware of it, it says Alter Rebbe, a beinoni is deicha b'shtei yadayim. You push it out. You block out the thought. That means you don't continue thinking or having the image that's in your mind that you're not supposed to have. You have to block it out. It's going to come back. Okay. The Alter Rebbe says every time you block it out, you're creating a much greater. You're doing something, right? This is another part of the struggle. The person says, I stopped thinking about it for a moment, but 2 minutes later it's coming back. So what did I accomplish? So Alter Rebbe says, no, you did accomplish something, right? A mashal, maybe not a good mashal for this is, it's like you told your children, I love you. You told them the same thing yesterday. Why are you telling them again today? Right? No, because every time you say it, it's a different avoid. It's a whole different feeling. It's a whole different experience. Every time you stop, every time you hold your machshavas, and that's on the level of machshavas. And on dibur, pashat. You shouldn't be a novel b'shus haTorah, that Ramban says in the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim. Yeah. That the person shouldn't be, we have to be careful with what we say. And as Alter Rebbe says, that what you say creates an avi. Quotes from the Sodom Amoris that what you say stays around you. It's something that affects you. There's a certain state of consciousness that affects you and other people around you. In Heinrich language, we have the idea of positive energy versus negative energy. If a person speaks negative, the energy around him and the energy around people is negative. I was speaking with someone who's married with kids, and his wife is not necessarily living up to certain standards that he would like. So he's trying to figure out how to approach this, whatever. I said, I really think the problem is rooted in you. Why? Because you give off a very negative energy in the house. What do you think your wife is going to be interested in now? All of a sudden, just if you wouldn't have the negative, passive-aggressive behavior in your house, you would, things. I think she would be willing to listen. Sometimes we have to, stop thinking that the problem is the other person. It's the energy we give off. It's the environment we create around ourselves, and that has very much and everything to do with our dibur. That's why. Dibur is one of the Alter Rebbe talks about the power of speech, the way it affects the Keil Meidus HaKavana. The power of speech is very, 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 very important. So that's the second level. And then Ma'aseh B'Poel, when it comes into action, when it comes into doing something, when it comes into Poel Mamish, into action, a person has to always think to themselves, is the action that I'm doing something that is in line with my avodah, in line with what I should be doing? So the Rebbe says that when you're dealing with these three levels of Machshava, Dibur, and Ma'aseh, so this is all something we all have the power to do. So that's the Sur Meirah. The Asay Toiv element is where a person has an Ava. That means that the person feels a certain closeness to the Eibishter, a certain feeling of a relationship with the Eibishter. It's obviously limited to what we spoke about earlier about the different levels of relationships that one could have. But the level of Avos Hashem on the basic level is that you want to learn the Eibishter's Torah, the Rebbe says. Pashut Pshat. The Rebbe says when it comes to mitzvahs don't really have an Ava to it. Because a mitzvah, you don't necessarily see what you're accomplishing. When it comes to Torah, you could feel like you're doing something because there's a geschmack in Torah. In fact, Torah has to be something that you appreciate. There's a whole interesting discussion in Halacha. There's a cloud. The Gemara says, "Mitzvah lav lahanis nitnu." Right? And when it comes to a mitzvah, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, the Chav Ches, the Gemara in Nedarim, the Gemara speaks about the concept of mitzvah lav lahanis nitnu. What does it mean, mitzvah lav lahanis nitnu? Mitzvah lav lahanis nitnu that when you do a mitzvah, it's not meant to have ano. So if a person, let's say, makes a neder, not to have ano from a place of shofar, so we say that since the mitzvah is to blow the shofar, you're not having ano because mitzvah slav l'chanis. So there's a whole discussion, the Taz and the Ktsois. When it comes to Torah, do we say that? Do we say Torah is mitzvah slav l'chanis? You're not supposed to have ano for a carrot. It's supposed to be the heart of Hashem that it's supposed to be a tainug, a pleasure, staff give mitzvahs. That by Torah we do say Torah you're supposed to have ano. And if that's the case, a person that generates an ava to the Eibishter, a feeling of closeness and love. So a person, usually the derech haved is that we have for Reish Haved is Sur Meirah, we have to have this Yiras Hashem, and then we have Asay Torah, we have Kibbutz Torah. The Alter Rebbe does tell us, and you get us a tshuva, we learn how to get us a tshuva. The Alter Rebbe speaks about this, that there is a possibility of throwing yourself into learning, right? The connection of Ava, which is the level of tshuva law, throwing yourself into learning, you could sometimes put it as the first thing. So if you're not necessarily feeling you have such a Yiras Shamayim, and you're not necessarily ready to control your Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, at least we could work on the Asay Torah. At least we could work on strengthening, again, as we said already a few times, strengthening our connection through learning Torah. So these are the two sides that we have in an Avodah. Limud HaTorah is something which requires Havana, V'Hasoga, requires understanding. I like saying you have to have mindful learning. You have mindful eating, and you have to have mindful learning. You have to know, you have to be aware that you're learning and grasp the information and digest the information and break down the information. You can't just say learning, l'shem learning. It has to be with a certain understanding. So when it comes to Havanas HaTorah, there's a geschmack. That's the luli seros chashashui ozavadti bani. Torah has a geshashui. So sometimes you learn Torah, you get an excitement, you get an appreciation for it. It becomes geschmack, and it's geredes, more learning. It brings out more and more and more. And then sometimes that then it affects Yiras Shamayim as well. Sometimes it goes the other way around. Sometimes you have to do Yiras Shamayim first to get yourself in that. Whichever way it works for you, the point is that these are the commitments we have to make. It would be a good achlata to make on the levels of learning, as we said before, but also on the smallest level, the impulse control, machshava dibur ma'aseh. It doesn't have to be major things. It doesn't have to be even for 2 minutes a day. For 2 minutes a day, you plan, I'm going to be a Beinani for 2 minutes a day. I'm going to control my thought, my speech and action for 2 minutes a day. Eventually, you could graduate to maybe 2.5, 3 minutes a day. But the goal doesn't have to be this huge goal. It could be a very simple goal, or not 2 minutes, 1 minute. maybe a few seconds, but at least you start somewhere. At least the mindset is that we're going to be a beinoni for a moment, and then eventually that you graduate, so to speak, and become better at it and more. Today, b'chlal, when it comes to focus, everybody's out of focus. It's one of the nisyonos today is
ADHD.
that's the excuse, but. The problem with focus is that our minds are wired to see screens moving every 15 seconds, so it's hard to then focus on a book. But even more importantly, even the Mahalach Machshava, there's so much information flowing so fast, it's very difficult to actually sit and think on something. So even to just slow down your thoughts, even if you're not going to stop thinking about something, but slow it down, right? Don't have the thought race. That's also a union to start off with. Whichever way it is, the moment of being a beinoni for that moment is something to do, something to put an effort in, and that goes to working on all these different fronts in order to bring out that this chizuk hayadus that the Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about, that we're supposed to be moving forward from Yud Beis and Gimel Dalet. For us, it's a mesirus nefesh. I want to think about this thought. I have a certain thought in my mind that gives me pleasure. I want to think about it, or I want to say something. I push it desperately want to say it. Mesirus nefesh not to. Or nesoya not to, and then you work on it. You strengthen it. It's a muscle that you strengthen more and more. L'chaim should have the ability to be able to mamshich our avodah. We're all doing avodah, mamshich avodah, and again through our efforts on our part in a klolistic, in a pratistic way, brings about our geula, our personal geula. A geula pratis brings about a geula klolis. So when we work on ourselves, to all work on our own personal inyanim that we need to deal with in ourselves, and be able to then bring ourselves out of that mechoshech la'od, ma'afel la'od, when we take ourselves out of the darkness into light. So that brings a collective light into the world with the geula mitzvah shalem l'chaim l'chaim.